Welcome to Anunnaki Sanctuary's channel. Tonight, let's move slowly back to the riverlands of ancient Sumer. In the soft distance, you can almost hear water. Quiet, patient, everywhere. They called him Enki, the silent architect beneath the surface. As you settle in, we'll trace his symbols, his stories, and the world that grew around them, calmly, carefully, and without rushing. We drop you right into a city that is not so much built as it is baked. A low brown sprawl rising from the flatness like someone pressed a thumb into the earth and left it there to harden. The air tastes faintly of river water and sun-warmed clay. You can hear it too, that soft gritty whisper when sand skates over brick. Somewhere nearby, a donkey complains in the ancient language of donkey, and you already know you're not getting a luxury tour package. You probably will not survive this if you expect comfy shoes, clean hands, or anyone to explain why the ground is trying to swallow your ankles. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and your local time in the comments, because I love knowing where the night listeners are drifting in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step forward and the city accepts you the way wet clay accepts fingerprints. The streets are narrow, edged by walls that look simple until you get close enough to see the seams. Every brick is a small decision. Every corner is a compromise with gravity. The place smells like hearth smoke, sour beer, and fresh mud, which is somehow both cozy and suspicious, like a blanket that might also be a trap. People pass you in linen and dust, carrying baskets, leading goats, moving with the brisk competence of folks who have exactly 12 chores before noon and no interest in your wide-eyed tourist energy. You are here for someone who does not greet you, someone who does not step out wearing a fancy beard and a crown, someone who does not get their name shouted by a herald. The silent architect, not necessarily a single person, not necessarily a genius with a dramatic cape, but a mind or tradition that shapes this place so thoroughly you can feel it in your knees. Because as you walk, you notice the city is not random. It has rhythm, it has habits, it has repeating patterns. Like a song hummed so often nobody remembers who started it. You pause at a wall where sunlight hits the mud brick and brings out the tiny straw fibers, like pale hairs frozen in place. Mud brick is the main character here. Stone is rare. Timber is precious in southern Mesopotamia. Down in the land the Sumerians call Sumer, you build with what the rivers give you: silt, clay, reeds, and patience. That is your mainstream fact to tuck into your pocket. These early cities rise in a landscape with few natural building stones. So sun-dried and later kiln-fired bricks become essential. And the whole architecture evolves around managing fragile materials in harsh weather. It is not glamorous. It is clever. It is also why the city constantly needs repair. A mud brick wall is less like a permanent monument and more like a living thing you keep alive with maintenance. Patching, replastering, rebuilding, and quietly swearing at the rain. You take a step and your foot finds a shallow gutter. Not a modern drain, but a channel worn into the street, designed to guide water away when the sky decides to be dramatic. Even before you reach any temple or palace, the city tells you its first secret. Survival is engineering. You cannot separate daily life from infrastructure. You cannot separate faith from storage rooms. You cannot separate power from who controls the labor that moves mud from riverbank to mold. A child runs past you, barefoot, carrying a lump of something, probably bread, possibly a brick. In this place, The difference is sometimes just how committed you are to chewing. You drift along, and the street opens into a small courtyard where women grind grain, their hands moving in circles that feel ancient in your bones. The sound is steady, like a low drum. A dog watches you with the bored authority of someone who owns the neighborhood. If you keep moving, you start noticing the way spaces nest inside each other. Doorways open into bent corridors. Rooms wrap around courtyards. Privacy is not a right. It is an architectural trick. You do not see big windows facing the street, because the street is dusty, loud and full of eyes. Instead, life turns inward. That inward turning becomes a kind of signature, and you wonder who first decided that the house should protect itself from heat, wind, strangers, and gossip. Maybe it is one person. Maybe it is a shared solution that spreads because it works. The silent architect might be an individual, or it might be the combined intelligence of thousands of households copying what keeps them cool. You pass a small shrine, not grand, just a niche with offerings. Someone has left a bit of food, maybe dates, maybe bread. You do not touch it, not because you are afraid of angering a god, though honestly that is not a bad reason, but because you have seen what happens when you mess with a community's routine. Even in the present, you do not steal the office coffee creamer without consequences. And this is ancient Mesopotamia, where consequences have a longer memory. Up ahead, a higher structure rises. Not a skyscraper, a mound of layered brickwork, stepped and deliberate. The bones of a ziggurat, or a temple platform, depending on the city and the era you imagine yourself in. You can feel people orienting around it. Paths seem to bend toward it. Sight lines funnel toward its mass. You realize this is not just a building. It is a magnetic center. It tells you where you are in the social universe. And here is where the silent architect becomes more than a metaphor. Because somebody decides where the sacred precinct sits. Somebody decides how high it rises. Somebody decides how wide the base must be to keep it from slumping. Somebody decides which streets lead to it and which do not. And when you decide who can approach a temple easily, you're also deciding who gets seen, who gets taxed, who gets recruited, who gets fed, and who gets told to go away and be quiet. You catch yourself imagining a single mastermind, a sort of ancient urban planner with a clay tablet under one arm and a glare that could straighten crooked walls. It is tempting. It makes the story neat. But historians still argue whether early Sumerian urban planning is the result of centralized design or a more organic growth shaped by social norms, religious needs, and practical constraints. That debate matters because it changes how you see power. If the city is planned from above, then authority is strong, coordinated, and managerial. If the city grows like a coral reef, then the architect is the system itself, an accumulation of choices that become tradition. Either way, the city is speaking in geometry. You notice right angles where you expect wandering paths. You notice repeated brick sizes, like the builders prefer standard units. You notice that important buildings sit on platforms, lifting them above damp ground, making them visible, and giving them an extra layer of, you cannot just stroll in here like you own the place. Platforms are a practical answer to floods and moisture, and a psychological answer to hierarchy. You do not just enter the temple, you ascend to it, step by step, like your knees are paying a tax. You drift toward a busy area where men haul baskets of clay. The baskets are woven from reeds, and they creak. A foreman, or what feels like one, gestures sharply. People respond. Labor is organized. You are watching a city keep itself together through coordinated effort. And yes, a mainstream historical fact slips in here too. Sumerian city-states rely on large-scale communal labor for building canals, walls, and temples, often under temple or palace administration. That administration is not just spiritual, it is economic. Temples manage land, store grain, distribute rations. They are religious banks with brick facades. Somewhere nearby, a scribe sits with a lump of clay. You do not see the writing clearly yet, but you feel the presence of record-keeping. The silent architect may not lay bricks with his own hands. He might be the one who counts bricks, who assigns rations, who schedules crews. Because in a world where everything is mud and manpower, the real miracle is coordination. You glance down at your own hands. They are dusty now, the fine powder of dried clay clinging to your skin. You think about how many hands touched each brick before it became a wall. Someone dug the clay, someone carried it, someone mixed it with straw, someone pressed it into a mold, someone lifted it out, someone set it to dry, someone stacked it, someone plastered it. A building is not an object, it is a process. The silent architect is whoever understands the process well enough to make it repeatable. Now, for a quirky tidbit, the kind that makes you lean closer even though your brain wants to nap. In some Sumerian contexts, builders sometimes buried foundation deposits, little offerings under corners or thresholds, meant to secure divine favor and stability. These could include figurines, inscribed objects, crochets, or symbolic items. It is like leaving a charm inside the walls, except the charm is for a god who is not impressed by your personality and wants proper paperwork in the form of ritual. And you can see how that practice blurs the line between engineering and magic. The city is built with mud and math, but it is also built with belief. If a wall collapses, it is not only a structural failure. It can be interpreted as a spiritual commentary, which is the ancient equivalent of your house getting a 1-star review from the universe. You keep walking, and the noise shifts. The clatter of work, the low murmur of trade, the occasional shout, sharp as a thrown pebble. You smell beer again, thicker now, and you remember that brewing is big here, a daily staple, not a weekend hobby. You also remember you are not here to get tipsy in a reed hut, even if your body says, honestly, that sounds soothing. Stay focused, time traveler. A narrow lane brings you to a spot where the wall changes texture. Here, bricks are laid more carefully. The plaster is smoother. Someone cared extra. It might be a richer household, a small administrative building, or part of the temple precinct's edge. You run your eyes along the surface and you think, whoever designed this knew where people's eyes would land, knew where hands would brush, knew where rain would strike. That knowledge feels intimate. It is the knowledge of a builder who has seen walls fail and learned to coax them into lasting longer than they want to. You look up and the skies are washed blue, harsh and bright. Heat shimmers above rooftops. The city is low, its roofs mostly flat, some covered with reeds and mud. On one roof, someone spreads something to dry. On another, a child peeks over the edge, curious about you, then disappears like a lizard slipping into shade. You realize the silent architect's greatest trick is that you do not notice him. You notice the king's statue. You notice the god's temple. You notice the market's noise. But the plan beneath your feet, the standardized brick, the drainage channel, the inward-facing house, the raised platform, the organized labor, the ritual deposit, all of it points to an intelligence that is everywhere and nowhere. And as you stand in the dusty light, you can almost feel the next step of the journey forming, like a line being drawn across wet clay. The rivers, because this city does not exist without them, And the quiet decisions about water will reveal more about the architect than any monument ever could. You keep moving without really deciding to, the way you keep scrolling without meaning to. Except here, the feed is dust and sun and the occasional goat that looks like it has seen your entire future and finds it disappointing. The city thins toward its edge, and you feel the pull of the rivers before you see them. Not a dramatic blue ribbon like in a vacation brochure, but a living, muddy force that makes the ground damp, the air heavy, and the politics sharp. You can smell it first, that wet mineral scent with a hint of rot from reeds and old vegetation. If ancient Sumer had a perfume counter, this would be called Eau de Survival, and it would be sold in an unbreakable clay jar because, obviously, glass is for people who enjoy heartbreak. You step down onto a track that runs toward a canal, and suddenly the whole idea of a silent architect widens. Buildings are nice, sure, but water is the real blueprint. Whoever manages it shapes everything: crops, taxes, labor schedules, trade, even where people build their homes. You can almost hear the river humming like a generator, powering the entire system. Mainstream fact, tucked neatly into your sleepy brain. Southern Mesopotamia depends heavily on irrigation agriculture, using canals to bring water from the Tigris and Euphrates to fields, because rainfall is limited and unreliable. That means organized canal digging, maintenance, and water allocation become central to city-state life. It is not optional. It is not a hobby. It is the difference between bread and famine, between a stable city and a sudden, panicky exodus with everyone carrying their best pot and their most judgmental grandmother. You stop at the canal's edge. The water moves slowly, thick with silt, reflecting sunlight in a dull, metallic way. A line of men wade knee-deep, clearing reeds, scooping muck, tossing it onto the bank. Their movements are synchronized, like a ritual, and in a sense it is. If they do not do this, the canal clogs. If the canal clogs, fields dry. If fields dry, granaries empty. If granaries empty, everybody gets very spiritual very quickly, and not in a cute candlelit way. Somebody on the bank shouts instructions. Somebody else records something, maybe on a tablet, maybe just by memory. The silent architect might be standing right there, not wearing a crown, just holding a stick and a plan in his head. You realize water management is a kind of invisible architecture. Channels, levees, sluices, and timing. It is the art of persuading a river to behave for long enough to grow barley. You walk along a levee and notice how the ground rises slightly, built up by layers of dumped mud. A levee is a wall too, just a wall made to keep water from doing its favorite hobby, which is going wherever it wants. You look out across the plain. In the distance, fields stretch in neat patches, greenish and gold, broken by reed beds. Birds lift and settle. The air buzzes with insects. It is peaceful. If you forget that every inch of this calm is maintained by relentless labor and the constant fear that the water will either vanish or arrive in an uninvited flood mood. Here comes the open debate phrase. Because it fits right into the silt. Historians still argue whether large-scale irrigation in early Sumer required strong centralized authority from the start, or whether it began as smaller community efforts that gradually scaled up into more hierarchical management. You can feel both possibilities in the scene. On one hand, the canal system looks like it needs coordination. On the other, you can imagine neighbors digging ditches, then linking them, then realizing, oh no, now we need rules. Because your upstream neighbor just decided to borrow the water and your crops are dying. Rules. That is the next thing you sense. Water is not just physics. It is law. It is social agreement. It is the kind of thing that turns into arguments that start polite and end with someone dramatically pointing at the sky like the gods are going to issue a verdict. You picture a tablet somewhere, dry and safe in an archive, listing who gets water when, who owes labor for canal cleaning, who gets fined for damaging a bank. Maybe this is where administration begins to feel unavoidable. The silent architect is not only building channels, but building compliance. You can build a canal once, but you have to maintain it forever, and forever requires systems. A worker glances at you, squinting like you are an oddly shaped problem. You try to look non-threatening, which in ancient terms mostly means you do not touch anything, and you do not act like you own land. You keep walking. As you go, you notice the canal branches. One main channel splits into smaller ones, like fingers reaching into the farmland. Each branch has a slightly different bank height, a slightly different flow. Someone adjusted these. Someone tuned them. This is not random. It is incremental engineering, refined over generations. You can almost hear the discussions. If we raise this bank, we can send more water to that field. If we cut here, we can drain faster after a flood. If we do nothing, we die. The ultimate motivational poster, now the quirky, fringe-flavored tidbit. In the wider Mesopotamian imagination, rivers are not merely natural features. They can be personified, divine, or tied to cosmic order. Water is life, yes, but it is also a moral force. Later myths talk about great floods, divine decisions, and the delicate balance between human noise and divine patience. Even if those specific stories evolve over time, the feeling is here already. When water misbehaves, it is easy to interpret it as meaning something beyond weather. The canal becomes both a tool and a conversation with the unseen. You reach a spot where a small gate-like structure controls flow into a side channel. It is simple, maybe wood and reeds and packed earth, but it is the kind of simple that matters. With a gate, you can decide who gets water and when. The silent architect, again, is not just a builder. He is a distributor, a scheduler, a quiet ruler with mud on his calves. You think about the city behind you. All those houses, those courtyards, that temple platform, they depend on grain, and grain depends on water. So in a way, every wall in the city is supported by a canal somewhere out here. The city is a visible skin. The irrigation network is its circulatory system. If you want to understand the architecture, you have to understand how the body breathes and feeds. You follow the canal toward a point where it meets a larger watercourse, and you feel a shift in scale. The river itself is broader, moving with a slow power. The bank is busy with boats, shallow draft, made of reeds or wood, loaded with baskets and jars. People shout, animals bray. The smell of fish mixes with mud and sweat. Trade is alive here, and the architect's influence stretches into this too. Because if you control canals, you also control transport routes. Waterways are the highways of this landscape, especially when roads turn to sludge or sand. A boat slides past, and you notice the cargo, bundles of reeds, maybe grain, maybe clay, maybe something more valuable like bitumen. Bitumen is that sticky natural tar used for waterproofing and mortar in some contexts, and it smells sharp, dark, almost oily. You imagine it smeared on boats, on baskets, on walls, sealing them against water's constant attempt to infiltrate everything like an unwanted group chat. You feel your mind drifting. It is the rhythm. Water does that. It pulls your attention into slow loops. But then you remember the city-state's politics, and your brain wakes up again like it just heard its name, because water creates conflict. Upstream versus downstream, one canal branch versus another, one city-state claiming it needs more, another claiming you are stealing. The rivers do not care about your boundaries, but humans absolutely do. They draw lines, they build levees, they argue, they raid. If you want to guess why Sumerian cities build walls later, or why they develop strong rulers, you can start right here, with a canal gate and a dry field. You walk along the riverbank and see a shrine, small again, where someone has placed offerings, water and gods. Again, you can almost hear a whispered request. Let the flow be steady. Let the banks hold. Let the salinity not creep in. And yes, salinity is the quiet villain in this story. You are not at collapse yet, but you can already taste the future in the soil. Irrigation brings water, but it also brings dissolved salts. And over time, if drainage is poor, salts accumulate and reduce crop yields. It is like the land slowly developing an allergy to your farming. You do everything right, and still the ground gets bitter. You take a pinch of dried soil from the edge of a field and rub it between your fingers. It feels fine, dusty, and you imagine the microscopic crystals that will, over centuries, turn some fertile plots into trouble. The silent architect, if he's wise, worries about drainage as much as irrigation. But does anyone listen when the problem is slow? People are terrible at slow problems. You know this. Your phone battery dropping from 100 to 2% is a tragedy. But your posture ruining your spine over 10 years is apparently future you's problem. Same energy. A farmer looks up from his work, his face lined by sun and effort. He watches you, then returns to his field. He does not have time for metaphors. He has water to catch. You turn back toward the city, and now you see it differently. Not as a cluster of buildings, but as a node in a water web. Streets and walls are important, but the real lines are canals. The real architecture is liquid. You walk, and the sound of the river fades behind you. The city's hum rises again, and you feel the next shift coming, from water as lifeline to the city as a designed space. Because once the water is managed, the question becomes, how do you organize the people who depend on it? You come back into the city with a different kind of awareness. Like you just learned how plumbing works, and now you cannot unsee it anywhere. Every alley feels like it is laid on top of decisions about water, storage, and who gets to stand close to the temple without being told, politely or not, to back away. The sun has shifted. Shadows stretch longer. The mud brick walls glow warm, and for a second the whole place looks almost soft, like it might forgive you for being a time-lost stranger with modern ideas like personal space and sanitation. You follow a street that is wider than the others, not broad like a boulevard, but broad enough that two people with baskets can pass without doing that awkward sideways shuffle. The street's surface is packed earth, rutted in places, with little stones and broken pottery pressed into it like accidental decoration. You notice how it bends around a block, then straightens, then bends again. Not a perfect grid, but not pure chaos either. It feels like the city is negotiating between planned order and lived reality. Mainstream historical fact, delivered gently like a bedtime cookie. Some Sumerian and wider Mesopotamian cities show evidence of planned elements such as major streets and organized precincts, while many residential areas appear to grow more organically over time. There are moments of straight lines, then the messy improvisation of generations. You can almost sense an early template that later gets crowded by people building wherever they can, adding rooms, blocking old paths, creating a living maze. You stop at an intersection where 4 lanes meet, and you realize how rare that feels. Intersections are power points. They pull traffic. They create markets. They become places where news spreads, where arguments happen, where someone tries to sell you a fish that is definitely older than they admit. And in that moment, you wonder if this is accidental, or if someone placed it here intentionally. The silent architect might not draw on paper, but he understands flow. Human flow is as real as river flow, and if you want to manage a city, you manage how bodies move. A small crowd gathers nearby. Someone is distributing something. Maybe rations. Maybe supplies from a temple storehouse. A man with a reed stylus in hand stands near a stack of containers, talking to workers, even without reading any signs. You can tell this is administration. This is the "we are counting" energy. And counting is a kind of architecture too. Because it builds predictability, you drift closer, careful not to look like you're about to steal barley. A boy carries a sealed jar, its top covered with clay. A woman argues, her voice quick and sharp. The scribe does that universal human gesture of pretending he cannot hear someone complaining directly at him, which is honestly a talent that has survived from ancient cities to modern customer service desks. You smile to yourself. Joke 1. You realize the first bureaucrat is born the moment someone invents a queue, and you're standing in the beta version of the line system. You keep walking toward the heart of the city, and the elevation rises slightly. Not dramatically, but enough that you feel it in your calves. Cities like this build up over time, layers of mud brick and debris and rebuilding. You're literally climbing history, and your ankles are doing the research. Broken walls get leveled, new walls go on top. Floors rise, streets rise. Over centuries, the city becomes a mound, a tell, a hill made of itself. Historians still argue whether these early cities are guided by a coherent master plan at foundational stages, or whether planning is more about setting keys sacred and administrative anchors and letting everything else accrete around them. You can feel that debate in the way the city seems to have a center, yet refuses to be fully tidy. It is like your desk. You know where the important stuff is, but you cannot pretend it is organized to impress anyone. You pass clusters of houses. Their outer walls are mostly blank, with doors set into them like small dark mouths. You step through a doorway into a narrow passage that turns, then opens into a courtyard. Nobody stops you. Not because you are welcome, but because this is a dreamlike drift, and also because in this city, courtyards are private worlds. You look up and see sky framed by walls. In the middle, a small area for cooking. Maybe a pot. Maybe a storage jar. Life circulates around this open-air heart. This layout is not just preference. It is thermal strategy. Courtyards let hot air rise, provide shade, and create a controlled microclimate. The walls absorb heat during the day and release it at night, smoothing temperature swings. The silent architect. Again, might be the inherited wisdom of families who learn how to make mud brick behave like an air conditioner without electricity. Joke 2. You find yourself thinking, so the first smart home is literally a pile of mud. And somewhere in the future, a tech company tries to rebrand that as innovation. You step back out to the street, and the sound changes as you approach a more formal district. The streets here are cleaner, better maintained. There are larger open spaces. The walls are higher. People move with slightly more restraint, like they are aware of being watched. The temple precinct, the administrative core, whatever you call it, has an atmosphere. Even the dust seems to behave. You come to a boundary, a threshold where ordinary lanes meet a more open approach. And there, the built environment starts telling you about hierarchy in a language without words. The approach is more direct. Sight lines are clearer. This is intentional. When you can see the sacred building from farther away, your body starts to act differently. You slow down, you straighten, you feel small. That is design. A platform rises ahead, supporting a structure that you can sense is not a normal house. Its base is thick, layered, reinforced. Its walls are plastered. It has buttresses, those outward thickening supports that help hold weight and resist collapse. It is architectural muscle, and it is not only practical. It is messaging. It says, "This place stands. This place matters. This place is the city's spine." You circle the platform and notice ramps, stairs, and controlled entry points. If you want to go up, you have to go where they want you to go. The silent architect understands that control is easier when you shape the path. This is not just a building, it is choreography. Now you notice something else. Repeated measures. Bricks look similar in size. Openings align. It is not perfect, but there is standardization. That implies shared norms or oversight. Someone, somewhere, decides what a brick should be. Someone decides the angles. Someone decides the thickness. Without those shared rules, everything becomes more fragile. Standardization is the invisible skeleton of a city. You think about early Sumerian kings, those rulers whose names show up on inscriptions, claiming they built temples, dug canals, raised walls. They take credit, and perhaps they deserve some. Because mobilizing labor is hard, but the king does not personally align bricks. The king does not personally measure the foundation. The king does not personally calculate how much mud you need to make a platform wide enough not to slump. That work belongs to specialists, supervisors, master builders, craftsmen, and yet their names rarely echo through time. This is where the silent part feels heavy. The architectural knowledge exists, but the fame does not. The city is full of intelligence, but it is anonymous intelligence. It reminds you of modern infrastructure. You know the names of a few celebrity architects, but you do not know the person who designed the drainage system that saves your street from flooding. You do not know the engineer who figured out the load limits on your bridge. You only notice them when something fails. You move to a spot where a wall has crumbled slightly, exposing its layers. You see reed matting embedded, and you recall a quirky tidbit. Reeds are not just for baskets and boats. They are also used in construction as reinforcement, for roofing, and sometimes layered into walls, helping distribute stress. In a landscape with few trees, reeds are a gift, and that gift shapes the city's textures and smells, giving everything a faint, marshy undertone. You hear chanting, distant, maybe a ritual, maybe a call, maybe just workers singing to keep rhythm. The sound carries through alleyways, bending around corners. You follow it and find yourself near a gathering. People stand facing a building. Some hold small offerings. A priestly figure moves, and the crowd responds. The city's plan funnels bodies into shared moments like this. You realize that urban design is not only about logistics, it is about collective emotion, where people gather what they can see, how they enter, how they leave. Those decisions shape community. Joke 3. You catch yourself thinking that the city is basically an ancient social media platform, except instead of likes, you get barley rations, and instead of being cancelled online, you get shamed at the temple gate by someone's auntie. Different interface, same human energy. As the light deepens toward evening, the city's surfaces soften. The edges of buildings blur. Fires begin to glow in courtyards. Smoke rises in thin lines. The plan beneath your feet feels older than the people walking it, like a pattern that has been traced and retraced until it becomes instinct. And you realize that if you want to find the silent architect, you should not look for a single face. You should look for the repeating choices that make the city work, the main streets that guide movement, the precinct boundaries that separate sacred and mundane, the inward-facing houses that regulate heat and privacy, the elevated platforms that fight dampness and broadcast power. All of it is a language, and the city speaks it fluently. You let the street carry you onward, toward the looming mass of the temple district, because you can feel the next truth waiting there. Sacred architecture is not only a place to pray. It is a machine for storing grain, organizing labor, and turning belief into bricks. You do not stop when the street shifts under your feet. You just feel it, the way packed earth becomes more deliberate, more maintained, like someone actually cares if you trip here. The air changes too. There is less kitchen smoke, less casual noise, more of that restrained hush you get when you walk into a place where rules have extra rules. Even the dogs seem quieter, as if the temple district has posted an invisible sign that says, "Please keep your barking to a respectful minimum." Ahead, the mass of the ziggurat zone rises in layers, not necessarily the fully towering stepped mountain you see in glossy reconstructions, but the heavy truth of it, platforms, terraces, stairs, and thick walls designed to hold weight and meaning. You feel a slow awe that is half genuine and half involuntary, like your brain is responding to the architecture the way it responds to a deep bass note. Your chest recognizes power even before your mind labels it. Mainstream historical fact, slipped in like a soft footstep. In Sumerian city-states, temples are central institutions. They are not just places of worship, but major economic and administrative centers tied to land holdings, labor organization, storage, and redistribution. The temple complex is basically a sacred headquarters. You can pray here. Sure, you can also get audited here, which is arguably more terrifying. You climb a set of steps worn by thousands of feet. Each step is shallow enough to keep you steady, yet high enough to make you aware you are ascending. As you rise, you notice the way walls create corridors, guiding you, narrowing your choices. This is deliberate. The silent architect is not only building upward, but building your behavior. If you have only one route, you follow it. If you are funneled, you become manageable. It is the same logic as a modern museum line, except here the gift shop at the end might be a priest asking for offerings. And you do not get a tote bag, you get divine approval, which is honestly a better deal if you're trying to survive drought season. At the terrace, you pause. The city spreads out below, a sea of low roofs and narrow lanes, and you see how the temple district dominates not just physically but visually. It is the biggest, highest, most anchored thing in the landscape. You can tell yourself you're free, but your eyes keep returning to the center. That is design. That is control through presence. You walk along a wall and notice the construction. Thick buttresses press outward at intervals, giving strength and rhythm. Plaster smooth the surface, brightening it, reflecting light. You imagine it freshly finished, perhaps painted, perhaps gleaming under the sun. The temple does not want to blend in. It wants to be seen. It is a beacon and a billboard. Historians still argue whether the earliest temple platforms and monumental structures are primarily expressions of communal religious devotion, or whether they quickly become instruments of elite power and centralized administration. Standing here, You suspect the answer is both. People believe, truly. They fear the gods, love them, bargain with them, sing to them. But the temple also stores grain. The temple records transactions. The temple commands labor. A building that controls food controls people, and a building that controls the story of the gods controls the meaning of people's suffering and success. As you move deeper into the precinct, you catch the smell of grain. Not just a little, a lot. Dry, dusty, sweet. Storage. Somewhere behind these walls are rooms stacked with jars, baskets, sealed containers. The temple is a stomach, and the city feeds it. In return, it feeds the city, but on its own terms. A group of workers passes, carrying clay tablets in a basket. You hear the soft clack of clay on clay. A scribe walks with them, eyes narrowed, as if he is doing math in his head and does not appreciate the existence of distractions, including you, oxygen, and the concept of joy. You realize the temples are paperwork engines. The holy is managed. The divine is accounted for. Now you notice the difference between sacred spaces and storage spaces. The sacred area has controlled access, ritual cleanliness, perhaps an inner sanctum where only certain people can enter. The storage areas are functional, busy, full of movement, yet both are part of the same complex. This is the city's heart, but it is also its warehouse. You slip into a shadowed corridor where the air is cooler. The walls are thick here, insulating. Your footsteps sound muffled. You can hear distant chanting, low and rhythmic, like a lullaby with serious consequences. Somewhere a drum taps. The cadence is hypnotic, and your body starts to sync with it. This is where the ziggurat, or temple platform, begins to feel less like architecture and more like a living stage. The stairways are not just stairways. They are processional routes. People walk them in rituals, in festivals, in moments of crisis, in moments of joy. The building structures the city's emotions the way canals structure its crops. You think about why ziggurats rise at all. In part, because the land is flat, height is rare, height is holy. To build upward is to create a mountain where there is none. It is a human imitation of something the landscape does not offer. Also, practically, height lifts the sacred space above floodwaters, above dampness, above the messy everyday. You do not bring the god's house down into the mud. You raise it up like you are protecting it from your own chaos. Here is a quirky tidbit, the kind that makes your eyes widen even as you try to stay sleepy. In Mesopotamian temple practice, there is the idea that the god's statue is not a mere symbol, but can be treated as the god's presence, needing food, clothing, washing, and care. That means architecture must support ritual, daily life for a deity. The temple is a house for a god, complete with storage for offerings, spaces for washing, kitchens for preparing food, and controlled chambers for sacred objects. Imagine building a home for someone who never sleeps, never gets tired, and might punish you for serving yesterday's bread. That is customer service on nightmare difficulty. You move toward an open courtyard inside the precinct. The space is wide, with a hard-packed floor. The sky above is a rectangle of fading blue. Torches flicker near an entrance. People gather. Some hold small offerings. Some stand with hands clasped. Some just watch. Because watching is a form of participation. You see a priest pour a libation, liquid splashing onto the ground. The smell is sharp. Maybe beer. Maybe wine in a later context. But likely beer because Sumer loves its beer like it is a personality trait. Your mind drifts to the idea of the silent architect again. The architect here is shaping social order. If you want to meet the god, You must go through the temple system. If you want grain in hard times, you go through the temple system. If you want legitimacy, you align with the temple system. That system requires buildings, storage rooms, controlled pathways, and visible grandeur. The architect's choices reinforce the priesthood's authority, and the priesthood's authority justifies the architect's labor demands. It is a loop. Joke 1. Tucked into the torchlight. You suddenly think of the temple as the original subscription service. You pay in barley. You get protection and blessings. And the cancellation process is unclear and probably involves bad omens. You lean against a wall and feel its coolness. The plaster is smooth, slightly gritty. You imagine the work required to keep it smooth, to patch cracks, to repaint. Maintenance never ends. In a mud brick world, the temple is always being rebuilt. It is perpetually under construction, like a modern city center where there is always scaffolding and someone yelling about permits. Joke 2. You realize ancient Sumer has the same energy as a downtown street where the cones never go away. Except the cones are probably just piles of reeds. A procession begins. People move in a line, slow and deliberate. Music rises, the drumbeat thickens. You watch faces shift, eyes bright, expressions solemn. In this moment, the architecture does exactly what it is meant to do. It gathers, it directs, it amplifies emotion, it makes individuals feel part of something larger. And yet, you cannot stop noticing the practical side. Behind the ritual, there are storehouses. Behind the chant, there are ledgers. Behind the incense, there are labor schedules. The silent architect's true masterpiece might be this fusion, a structure that convinces people it is sacred while also functioning as the administrative brain of the city. Historians still argue whether temple economies are primarily redistributive systems that support communal welfare or whether they are mechanisms that concentrate surplus and power into elite hands. You see the double edge. The temple can feed the hungry. The temple can also decide who deserves to be fed. That decision is power. As night deepens, torches cast orange light on the stepped masses. The ziggurat's edges glow, and the shadows between buttresses become dark pockets, like the building is remembering things. You look down at the city again and realize how many lives revolve around this place without ever entering its inner rooms. The architecture shapes them anyway. Like gravity, you step back down, slowly, feeling the day's dust on your skin. The city's ordinary lanes await, but you carry the temple district's weight with you, like a stone in your pocket, and you sense the next turn of the story, the quiet invention of standardization, workshops, molds, measures, repeatable bricks. Because to build a sacred machine like this, you need more than belief. You need a production system. You drift away from the temple precinct like you are leaving a loud room and your ears need a minute to forgive you. The streets feel tighter again, warmer with cooking smoke, louder with ordinary life. But now you cannot stop thinking about how that massive sacred complex even happens in a world made mostly of mud, reeds, and stubbornness. You follow the scent of wet clay, and it leads you the way fresh bread leads you through a modern neighborhood. The smell is earthy, damp, slightly sweet, like rain on dry ground. Except there is no rain. Just people making rain's substitute out of labor. You turn a corner and the city's quiet machinery reveals itself. Not gears and metal, but rows of molds, stacks of bricks, piles of straw, and workers moving with practiced efficiency. A workshop district, or at least a cluster of production spaces, hums like a hive. You see clay being mixed in shallow pits. You see straw chopped and tossed in. You see feet stomping the mixture into something smooth enough to shape. The sound is wet and rhythmic, like someone making soup with their legs. Your modern brain tries to complain, then remembers you willingly came to ancient Sumer for relaxation, which is like going to the gym for a nap. Mainstream historical fact. Solid as a brick, mud bricks in Mesopotamia are often made by mixing clay with temper, such as straw, pressing it into molds, then drying it in the sun, with kiln firing used in some contexts for more durable bricks, especially where water exposure is a problem. Standard sizes and repeated production make large building projects possible. You watch it happen in real time. This is not one artisan sculpting a unique masterpiece. This is volume. This is repeatability. This is the city learning how to copy itself. You pick up a brick that has just been turned out of a mold. Still damp. Still soft at the corners. It feels heavier than you expect. And you instantly understand why labor matters so much. Every brick is a small weight, and every building is a mountain of small weights. You set it down again carefully, because if you drop it, you are basically destroying someone's afternoon, and ancient people do not have the emotional bandwidth for your clumsy time-traveler hands. A foreman walks past, not a king, not a priest, just a person with authority in the practical sense. His eyes scan the line of bricks, the workers, the piles of material. He points, gestures, redirects. The whole operation shifts like a flock of birds turning mid-air. You realize the silent architect might look like this. Not grand, not famous, just relentlessly attentive. You move deeper into the workshop area, and you see measurement in action. A mold is a standard, a basket is a unit, a pile is counted, a work team is assigned. Someone keeps track. It is not perfect, but it is systematic enough to build big. Your mind flickers to the temple platform again, that thick base that needs consistent material. If bricks vary too much, walls weaken. If walls weaken, the building slumps. If the building slumps, people panic and blame gods. And suddenly you are having a theological crisis because somebody made a brick too small. The pressure is real. Historians still argue whether standardization in early Mesopotamian production is driven mainly by centralized institutions like temples and palaces that demand consistent outputs, or whether it emerges from craft traditions and market needs as workshops compete and copy successful methods. You can see how it could be both. A temple project might impose standards, but even an ordinary builder quickly learns that uniform bricks make life easier. Repeat what works. That is the oldest rule. A line of bricks dries in the sun, laid out in neat rows like a little army. Some are marked. You lean closer and see impressions, maybe fingerprints, maybe a stamp, maybe a simple sign pressed into the surface, and you get that little shiver of connection. Someone touched this clay thousands of years ago, and the clay keeps their touch like a memory. Here is your quirky tidbit. Strange and charming. In later Mesopotamian traditions and in some building contexts, bricks can be stamped with inscriptions that name a ruler or dedicate a building to a god. Even when the stamp is about royal credit, it hints at something else too. Bricks can carry identity, ownership, and accountability. A stamped brick says, "This belongs to this project, this authority, this story." It is like branding. Except instead of a logo on a box, you have a king's name pressed into mud, which is honestly the most ancient form of influencer marketing imaginable. Joke one sneaks in while you watch a worker press a mold down with a satisfied thump. You suddenly think, wow, this is the original mass production line, and it is powered by feet, sunlight, and the unspoken fear of disappointing a god. Somewhere in the future, a business book calls it lean manufacturing. You follow the flow of activity and notice how the workshop is arranged. Wet clay pits are close to water access. Drying areas are open and sunny. Storage stacks are slightly raised to avoid damp ground. Tools are kept near workstations. None of this is accidental. It is spatial thinking. It is layout design. It is the same logic that organizes a modern kitchen so you do not have to run a marathon just to make toast. A worker carries a bundle of reeds toward a roofing area. Another shapes a mat. Reeds become beams. Mats. Binding. Timber is limited. So people become inventive with what grows in the marsh. You watch someone lash reed bundles together, then coat them with mud. This is roofing that breathes and insulates. Roofing that is lightweight compared to pure brick vaulting. It is not flashy, but it works. Joke 2 arrives when you imagine explaining this to a modern home improvement show. Tonight on Ancient Fixer Upper, you get one courtyard, infinite dust, and a roof made of reeds and optimism. Nearby, pottery kilns radiate heat. The air shimmers. You see jars stacked like rounded towers, ready to hold grain, beer, oil, whatever the city needs to store and move. You remember that storage is part of architecture. A building is not only walls. It is containers. It is the systems that keep surplus safe. Surplus is what allows specialists to exist. Scribes, priests, builders, merchants. Surplus is what turns a village into a city. And surplus depends on the ability to store, measure, and distribute. That means the silent architect might also be the person who designs storage rooms, decides jar sizes, plans shelves, and cares deeply about whether a lid fits properly. You watch a man smear bitumen along the inside seam of a container, making it waterproof. The smell is sharp, almost tarry. It clings to the back of your throat. Waterproofing is not glamorous, but it is essential when your world is either too dry or too wet. You think about boats again, about canals, about the constant fight against leakage. Every solution has a smell. In Sumer, survival smells like mud, reeds, smoke, and bitumen. As you stand in the workshop district, you also notice the social shape of labor. There are teams, there are divisions. Some people mix clay, some carry, some mold, some stack, some oversee. Skill is stratified. Strength is valuable. Coordination is everything. If one part slows, everything slows. The city is a chain, and the workshops are a crucial link. You glance at the workers' faces. Some look tired. Some look focused. Some look like they have done this every day of their lives and will keep doing it until the day they do not. You feel the weight of that. The temple's grandeur is built on ordinary bodies. The silent architect's plans are executed by hands that may never be named. You move past a stack of finished bricks and notice their uniformity. There is comfort in it. Predictability. This is the city making itself stable. Standard bricks lead to standard walls. Standard walls lead to predictable repairs. Predictable repairs lead to a city that can endure beyond one season. You realize how quiet an innovation this is. Nobody sings epic poems about brick molds. But without them, you do not get monumental platforms, durable storehouses, or large-scale walls. Joke 3 arrives as you imagine a dramatic hero statue commemorating the invention of the brick mold. The plaque reads, "He made rectangles. Everyone calm down." Honestly, you would visit that monument. The light leans toward evening again, and the drying bricks turn a deeper brown, edges crisping. Workers begin stacking them. building temporary towers like mini-buildings that will become bigger buildings. You watch the process and feel like you are witnessing the city's secret heartbeat. Not the chanting at the temple, not the shouting at the market, but the repetitive, disciplined act of making units that can be assembled into anything. And you understand something important about the silent architect. He does not only design shapes, he designs systems. He relies on standardization to turn vision into reality. He needs repeatable bricks, organized workshops, predictable materials, coordinated labor. He needs the city to function like a production organism. As the workshop noise softens, you find yourself listening for the next thread. You have seen streets, canals, temples, and bricks. Now you feel the next quiet invention waiting nearby, like a hand reaching for a stylus. Because when you build at this scale, you need instructions that travel farther than a shouted order. You need memory that does not forget. You need marks in clay that can carry a plan. You follow that imagined hand, reaching for a stylus, and it becomes real the moment you step into a quieter pocket of the city where the air feels less like mud and more like dust and concentration. The workshop clamor fades behind you. Here, the noise is softer, the scrape of reed on a clay, the occasional cough, the rustle of woven mats, a low murmur when someone checks a number and realizes the universe has once again betrayed them with basic arithmetic. A scribe sits cross-legged on a reed mat, hunched over a small tablet of clay that looks harmless until you remember it can trap decisions for thousands of years. His hands are stained with wet earth. His reed stylus presses little wedge shapes into the surface. Press, lift, rotate, press again. The marks appear like tiny bird tracks, neat and angled, and your eyes keep trying to turn them into pictures. But this is not drawing. This is code. Not computer code, obviously, but the kind that makes your brain itch with curiosity because it is the city's memory made visible. Mainstream historical fact, steady as a measured line. Cuneiform writing develops in ancient Mesopotamia, likely from earlier pictographic and accounting practices, and is used first and foremost for administrative tasks like recording goods, rations, labor, and transactions. It expands later into literature, law, and all sorts of human drama, but it starts with counting. The first great written stories are not romances or battle sagas. They are basically receipts. And honestly, that feels extremely on brand for humanity. The scribe does not look up at you. He does not need to. His world is the tablet. In it, he can hold a warehouse, a workforce, a canal schedule, a temple offering list. The silent architect's voice might live here, in these wedges. Because when you build something big, the hardest part is not having an idea. The hardest part is making the idea survive across days, across teams, across the moments when everyone is tired and hungry and the foreman is yelling that the bricks are late. Writing is the solution to forgetting. It is also the solution to arguing. Because you can point to a tablet and say, no, the record says you owe 3 days of labor, and the tablet does not care about your excuses. You watch the scribe's motions and notice the discipline. The tablet is held at an angle. The wedges are pressed with consistent force. Lines are spaced. Someone taught him this. Someone taught him the signs. This is training. This is specialization. A different kind of craft, still rooted in clay. A young apprentice sits nearby with a smaller tablet. Practicing. He presses a wedge too deep, pulls away, grimaces, smooths the clay, tries again. Joke 1 slides in gently as you imagine the ancient equivalent of a comment section. Nice wedges, bro, but your spacing is cursed. The apprentice looks like he would cry if someone said that out loud. So you keep it to yourself. You drift closer and see other tablets stacked in a basket. Some are rounder, some are rectangular, some are thicker, meant to last. Others are thin and temporary, like notes meant to be erased or recycled. You realize the city has different layers of writing the way it has different layers of buildings. Quick notes for daily rations, more permanent records for temple inventories, documents that will be dried or baked to preserve them. The silent architect might love this. Bricks standardize construction, tablets standardize instruction. You glance toward a doorway and glimpse a storeroom, dim and cool. Jars line the walls. A worker carries a basket of grain. Another waits while the scribe writes. The worker's patience looks fragile. He shifts his weight, eyes flicking to the basket like it might evaporate if the stylist takes too long. Joke 2. You suddenly understand that paperwork delay is not a modern invention. It is a sacred tradition stretching back to the first city. And somewhere in the cosmos, a god of bureaucracy is smiling. The scribe finishes a line and sets the tablet aside to dry slightly. Then he takes a cylinder seal, small and carved, and rolls it across the clay. The seal leaves a continuous band of images, like a tiny movie strip. Animals, figures, symbols, identity made physical. A signature you can feel with your fingertips. You get a thrill, because this is the moment the city invents trust at scale. If your seal is on the tablet, it means you agreed, you witnessed, you authorized. In a place where most people cannot read, the seal is a visual proof that someone important touched this record. Historians still argue whether the primary driver behind early writing is purely economic administration or whether political and religious needs, like tracking temple offerings and legitimizing authority, are equally foundational from the beginning. Watching the seal roll, you suspect again that it is both. Economy and belief are braided. You can record barley, and you can record that the barley belongs to a god. And suddenly, a simple tally becomes a sacred obligation. Writing does not just store information. It stores power. You lean in and imagine what these tablets contain besides numbers. Lists of workers assigned to dig canals. Counts of bricks delivered to a temple project. Notes about timber arriving from far away. Maybe even measurements. The early bones of a blueprint. Because you do not need a modern drawing with scale bars to convey a plan. Sometimes you only need a list. So many bricks of this size, for a wall of this length, to be built by this team, by this date, with this allocation of food. The silent architect can build a building with logistics alone. A plan can be a schedule. Your mind drifts to the idea of city planning again. Street width, platform heights, wall thickness. If those choices are repeated, they can be taught. If they can be taught, they can be written. And if they can be written, they can outlive the person who first discovered them. Writing makes architecture transferable. It turns skill into something that can travel farther than a single voice. Now for a quirky, slightly fringe-flavored tidbit, the kind that sits at the edge of scholarship and popular imagination. Some people love to imagine that ancient tablets hide secret technical knowledge, star maps, or coded messages about grand cosmic plans. Like the scribes are quietly writing instructions from the heavens. In reality, most early tablets are extremely practical. But the fascination itself tells you something. When you see a script you cannot read, your brain wants it to be mystical. The unknown always tempts you into drama. And maybe, sometimes. The drama is simply this. The most world-changing technology in the city is a bored scribe tracking sheep. You watch a different scribe draw a simple diagram on clay. a rough outline of a field plot, maybe a canal edge, maybe a storage room layout. It is not art. It is function. And it hits you that the city is now capable of making space into information. A field becomes lines on a tablet. A building becomes quantities. A project becomes a record you can revisit. Memory becomes external. Joke 3 arrives quietly as you realize you are basically watching ancient project management software, except it crashes if someone drops it, and the update is literally wet the clay and start over. You imagine a scribe muttering, "Version 2 of the temple wall plan is cancelled because a goat sat on it." The scribes are not alone. People come and go, bringing goods to be recorded, receiving tokens or notes. You see small clay lumps with impressions. And you remember earlier accounting systems where tokens represent quantities, later sealed inside clay envelopes. Even if you are not sure which exact practice is happening in this moment, you can feel the evolutionary chain, from physical tokens you can count, to marks on clay you can store, to full writing you can expand. It is the city upgrading its memory. You also notice how the scribal space is positioned, not deep inside the temple's most sacred chamber, but near the flow of goods, close to storehouses, close to distribution points. That placement is architecture too. Information wants proximity to what it tracks. The silent architect of the city might collaborate with the silent architect of record-keeping. One builds walls, one builds accountability. Together, they make the city scalable. You step outside and the evening air is cooler. Fires glow in courtyards. The sky darkens to a deep, soft blue. You can hear distant music, laughter, the normal human soundscape that never disappears completely, even under temples and paperwork. But now you carry a new understanding. The city is not only built from bricks and canals, it is built from records, from marks that make promises stick, and you feel the next part of the journey tugging you onward, back toward water again, but this time not the river's wild edge. This time, the engineered veins, the canals that become invisible highways, the routes where goods and orders travel together, carried by boats and backed by tablets. You step away from the scribes and their quiet clay universe, and almost immediately the city feels louder again, like someone turned the volume back up on existence. The night has thickened, torches flicker, fires glow in courtyards. The air is cooler, but it still holds the day's heat in the walls, like the mud brick is reluctant to let go. You find yourself drifting toward the water without thinking, because once you learn that canals are the city's bloodstream and tablets are its memory, you start wanting to see where the two meet, where movement and record-keeping overlap, where a boat's cargo becomes a line of wedges in clay. You reach a canal edge inside the city, narrower than the main ones out in the fields, but busy. A wooden footbridge crosses it, simple planks, slightly warped, held together by lashings that look like they are doing their best. People move across with baskets, jars, bundles. A donkey refuses to step on the bridge for a full minute, proving that even in ancient Sumer, logistics is held hostage by one stubborn creature with opinions. Joke 1. You watch the donkey's dramatic pause and think, congrats. You just witnessed the first recorded infrastructure protest, and the donkey's demands are probably more snacks, less bridges. A shallow boat slides along the canal, guided by a pole. The water reflects torchlight in broken orange ribbons. The boat carries jars, maybe beer, maybe oil, maybe something sticky and valuable like bitumen. The poleman moves with practiced ease, eyes scanning the bank, watching for obstacles. You notice how the canal edges are reinforced in places, lined with bricks or packed reeds, shaped to resist erosion. Again, this is not random. This is maintenance, design, and an understanding of water's habits. Mainstream historical fact, carried gently on the current. Canals in Mesopotamian cities serve multiple functions, including irrigation, drainage, transport, and sometimes as boundaries between districts. Waterways are major routes for moving heavy goods, especially in a landscape where overland transport is slower and more expensive. A boat can carry what 10 humans would struggle to drag across a dusty street. The canal is an invisible highway, and the city is built with that assumption. You walk along the canal bank and see a small landing area, a kind of dock, not grand, but flattened and reinforced, with a slope that makes loading easier. 2 men unload baskets while another checks the cargo. A scribe is there too, which makes your brain do that satisfied little click. Of course, movement and record, cargo and tablet. This is the city's nervous system firing. The scribe's presence makes the canal feel less like a natural feature and more like a managed channel of authority. Goods move, and the movement is observed, counted, authorized. You can see how the silent architect's influence stretches beyond walls and platforms. If you design the canal network, you shape trade routes. If you shape trade routes, you shape wealth. If you shape wealth, you shape power. Power loves architecture because architecture makes power visible. You notice something else. The canal route is not straight. It bends through the city like a deliberate thread, connecting key spaces, a market area, a storage district, a temple precinct edge. It is like someone drew a line between the places where heavy stuff needs to go. This is planning in a watery language. Historians still argue whether the integration of canals into urban layouts is primarily driven by practical transport needs or whether canals also serve symbolic and administrative roles, reinforcing sacred geographies and political boundaries. You can feel both. The canal makes transport easier, sure, but it also creates controlled access points. It can separate neighborhoods. It can be a barrier you must cross at specific bridges. And bridges, as you know, are choke points. Choke points are power points. If you control the bridge, you control the flow. You cross a bridge and pause mid-span. Below you, the water slides. It carries bits of reed, maybe a lost leaf, maybe a tiny scrap of something from a boat. Above you, the city hums. You feel the quiet genius of using water not only to feed fields, but to organize the city itself. On the far side, you find a cluster of workshops near the canal. Of course they are here. Wet clay needs water. Potters need water. Brewers need water. Tanners need water. Anyone doing messy work wants a place to dump waste and rinse tools, which means canals also carry the city's less glamorous outputs. The canal is both highway and gutter. It is the line between clean and dirty, sacred and profane. And the silent architect has to think about that too. Where do you place the work that stinks? Where do you place the work that is essential but socially unpleasant? You place it where the water can carry away evidence. A brewer's space breathes out a warm, sour aroma. You recognize that tang of fermentation. People stir vats. Someone laughs. Someone wipes sweat. You watch them pour liquid into jars and seal them. Beer in Sumer is not just a drink. It is a food, a ration, a social glue. And it moves by canal because jars are heavy. The canal makes daily life possible. Quirky tidbit time. Floating in like a reed on the surface, there are ancient hymns and songs that celebrate beer and brewing. And in Mesopotamian tradition, brewing is linked to divine figures. The idea that a craft has a patron deity tells you how deeply labor and belief are intertwined. Even a canal-side brewery sits in a sacred economy. whether it admits it or not. The gods are in the ledger, in the grain, in the foam on your lips. Joke 2 slides in as you imagine the brewer's pitch. This batch is blessed by the goddess, and also by my cousin who definitely did not drop a reed mat into the vat. You smile because humor survives everywhere, and you can practically hear the ancient equivalent of friends teasing each other about whose beer tastes like canal water. You keep walking, and the canal widens slightly near a more important junction. Here, multiple channels meet. The banks are reinforced more carefully. You see evidence of sluice-like control points, simple gates, perhaps removable barriers, used to manage water levels. These are not the kind of devices you admire from a distance. They are the kind you rely on. They let you decide how much water enters a section of the city, how fast it moves, how it drains after a flood, how it feeds gardens, how it keeps foundations from turning into mush. Foundations. That word makes you glance at nearby buildings. You notice that structures closer to the canal sit on slightly raised bases or have thicker lower walls. Moisture is relentless. Mud brick wants to drink water like it is thirsty. You can plaster and patch and build, but you cannot ignore water. So the silent architect designs with dampness in mind, choosing where to build heavier, where to raise floors, where to place drains, where to place waste pits, where to place courtyards. You watch a boat pull up to a temple storehouse entrance. Workers unload jars. A priestly figure observes. A scribe writes. The boat leaves. The system continues. It is smooth, efficient, quietly intimidating. You realize the canal network is not just commerce. It is supply chain for sacred authority. The temple's ability to redistribute rations depends on waterborne transport. That means canals support not only crops, but legitimacy. Historians still argue. Again, because historians love to argue the way cats love to knock things off shelves. Whether temple institutions primarily control trade and transport, or whether private merchants also operate robustly alongside them, using waterways for their own profit. You can imagine both scenes in this same canal, the temple's official boat with sealed jars and recorded tallies, and the merchant's boat with goods and gossip, slipping through in the twilight, paying fees, making deals. You stop at a canal-side market. Lanterns glow. People squat near baskets of fish, onions, dates. A man calls out prices. A woman argues. A child tries to steal a dried fish and fails spectacularly. Joke 3. You watch the child's attempt and think. Yes, the first petty theft also happens here, and the child's crime is being too confident for his own coordination. The market smells sharp, salty, and alive. The canal brings fish. The canal brings trade. The canal brings strangers. The canal brings news. You sit on the bank for a moment, letting the water's movement lull you. You hear the slap of a pole in water, the creak of a boat, the murmured deals. It is soothing in a way, but it is also a reminder. The city is a web of flows. Water flows. Goods flow. People flow. Information flows on tablets. The silent architect's work is to channel flows without letting them become chaos. And yet, as you watch the canal's surface, you remember the tension in the story. Everything depends on these channels. If they silt up, movement slows. If they flood, foundations weaken. If they dry, trade collapses. The city's highway is also its vulnerability. You stand again and walk back toward the denser streets. Your eyes keep catching bridges, gates, and reinforced banks. You cannot help it. Once you see the city's invisible highways, you start noticing how much of life depends on them. And now you feel the next thread tightening. For all this coordination, for all this labor, For all this standardized production, the people who design and manage these systems rarely get credit. Kings get inscriptions, gods get hymns. The silent architect stays in the shadows. You leave the canal behind, and the city's sounds knit themselves back into the familiar fabric of footsteps, murmurs, and the occasional clack of pottery that makes you flinch like you're about to pay for it. You keep thinking about flow and control, about how much intelligence is embedded in banks and bridges, in brick sizes and courtyard angles, and then, like a pebble in your sandal that you cannot ignore, the question sharpens. Who gets praised for all this? Because you have seen the labor. You have seen the planning. You have felt the city's invisible logic guiding your body without asking permission. Yet when you listen to what people say, when you watch where reverence gathers, the names that rise are not the names of master builders. They are kings. They are gods. They are the temple. The architecture is everywhere. But the architect is missing, like a signature rubbed off by time and 1,000 dusty hands. You drift toward a public space where a stone or clay monument stands, or at least a dedicated display of authority. A figure is depicted in a posture that screams power, maybe holding a staff, maybe with hands clasped in that formal way that says, "I am pious and important, and definitely deserve your grain." Even if the exact era shifts in your mind, the pattern feels consistent. Rulers advertise their building projects. They take credit for canals, walls, temples. They are the ones whose names end up baked into memory. Mainstream historical fact. Set down gently. Mesopotamian rulers frequently commemorate construction and restoration projects through inscriptions, dedicatory objects, and foundation records, presenting themselves as chosen by the gods to build, repair, and maintain sacred and civic structures. Building is legitimacy. If you can say, "I raised the temple," or "I repaired the wall," you can also say, "I deserve to rule." The public hears the story. The public sees the building. The ruler becomes the bridge between divine approval and human labor. But you look around and you do not see a statue of Chief Brick Guy. You do not see an inscription that says, "Shout out to Nahum whoever," who actually measured the foundation correctly. You do not see a relief of the canal engineer, flexing with a surveying rope. And you start to feel the silence as something intentional, not accidental. You wander past a construction site where workers patch a wall. A foreman directs them. His voice is firm but not ceremonial. He is not performing for history. He is trying to keep the wall from collapsing next rainy season. A scribe nearby scratches notes onto a tablet. The tablet might record rations, workforce, deliveries. It might record the project itself. But even if the foreman's name appears on that tablet, it is not the name that gets sung. Historians still argue whether the relative anonymity of builders and planners in many surviving records reflects a cultural focus on divine and royal agency, or whether master builders did receive recognition in social contexts that simply did not survive archaeologically. Standing here, you can imagine both realities coexisting. Maybe the builders are respected locally, known by neighborhoods, celebrated in private, and maybe the public narrative still prefers kings and gods, because that narrative stabilizes the hierarchy. It is easier to govern when the story of creation points upward. You turn that idea over in your mind as you walk. The silent architect might be missing because the city itself is invested in not seeing him too clearly. If people start praising the engineer who makes the canal work, they might start asking why the engineer does not rule. If people start praising the planner who organizes labor efficiently, they might start realizing leadership can be technical, not divine. That is awkward for a king whose primary qualification is being born into the right family and having a convincing beard. Joke one slips out in your head, you picture a royal inscription that reads, "I built the wall," and beneath it, in tiny, invisible wedge marks, an exhausted worker has scratched, "Sure, buddy." You smile, because sarcasm is older than the bricks. You step into a lane where the walls are plastered and slightly smoother, and you see small marks on the surface. Some are accidental. Some look intentional, like a symbol pressed into damp plaster. It makes you think of craftsmen leaving subtle signatures, not for fame, perhaps, but for pride, for accountability, for a quiet claim that says, "I was here," in a world where official credit is monopolized. Maybe the trades develop their own hidden language of recognition, a sign only other builders notice. Here comes your quirky tidbit, leaning toward the fringe in a soft, bedtime way. There is a long-standing fascination with the idea of secret master builders, guild-like traditions, or coded marks that transmit knowledge quietly through generations, almost like an ancient professional whisper network. The evidence is uneven and often speculative, but the desire to imagine it tells you something human. When the official record ignores the people who make the world function, we start inventing shadow histories to compensate. Sometimes the shadow history is romantic. Sometimes it's just a way of saying, somebody had to know what they were doing. You keep walking and the city's social layers become clearer. Priests have authority because they mediate gods in grain. Kings have authority because they command armies and labor and claim divine approval. Scribes have authority because they control records. Builders, even brilliant ones, are tied to physical work and therefore, in many societies, placed lower on the ladder of public prestige than the people who command or interpret. It is not fair, but it is a recurring pattern in human history. The person who does the work is often less celebrated than the person who tells the story about the work. And the story matters. The story is architecture too. It shapes reality. If the king's story says the god told him to build, then the building becomes proof of divine favor. The people see the ziggurat and think, the gods are with us. They do not think, wow, that foreman really nailed the load-bearing buttresses. You drift toward the temple district again, not entering this time, just skirting the edge. Torches flicker on the walls. You hear chanting, distant. Somewhere inside, a priest performs rituals that make the city feel cosmically anchored. That anchoring is vital. It is soothing, but it also concentrates credit upward. When a temple stands, the god is praised. When a canal works, the god is praised. When a wall holds, the god is praised, and the king is praised for serving the god. The system has a neat trick. It absorbs success into the top layer of meaning. Joke 2 arrives as you imagine the ancient version of a modern corporate email. Great job, team. The gods and the king are thrilled. Please accept this inspirational hymn as your bonus. You can almost hear the groans. You pause beside a small shrine on a street corner. Somebody has left a tiny offering. Maybe a bit of food. Maybe a small figurine. The shrine is humble, but it holds something important. Personal devotion. The big temple is an institution. The shrine is intimate. It reminds you that people are not just subjects of a system. They have their own private relationships with the divine. And maybe, in those private relationships, they whisper thanks to the workers too. Maybe they know exactly whose hands repaired their roof last spring. You think about how knowledge moves in this city. Scribes can preserve information, but most building knowledge is probably oral and practical. A master builder teaches an apprentice by showing, correcting, repeating. The knowledge lives in bodies. How to judge clay, how to align bricks, how to reinforce a corner, how to read the ground for dampness, how to anticipate a wall slump. That kind of knowledge can be incredibly sophisticated and yet leave few direct traces. When archaeologists find walls, they find the result, not the conversation that produced it. Historians still argue whether there were formalized professional roles like architect in the modern sense in early Sumer, or whether building expertise existed as a spectrum of craftsmen, supervisors, and institutional officials whose titles and responsibilities shifted by context. And that matters because it changes your image of the silent architect. He might not be a single-named profession. He might be a network. Foremen, temple administrators, scribes, surveyors, master masons, all cooperating in a system that produces monumentality without producing a single celebrity. You walk past a group of workers resting, sharing food, talking. Their laughter is soft, tired, real. They do not look like anonymous history. They look like people. One gestures with bread in hand, telling a story. Another snorts with laughter. A third rolls his eyes with a universal expression of, "Here he goes again." The city's greatest structures are built by these moments, repeated labor, rest, day after day. Joke 3 slips in when you imagine the silent architect's true memorial being not a statue, but a perfectly level wall that makes every builder who passes it nod in respect, like, "Yeah, whoever did this? Absolute legend. No name needed. Just craftsmanship as reputation." As you continue through the darkening lanes, you feel the silence around credit less like an empty space and more like a deliberate design choice. The city is built to make rulers and gods visible, and to make the people who create that visibility fade into the background. The silent architect's anonymity is part of the system's stability, but you also sense something else, a crack in that neat story. Because sometimes, very rarely, someone's building work becomes so important, so politically useful, that it gets carved into stone and displayed. The city is about to lead you toward those moments, toward rulers who brand themselves as builders so obsessively that their monuments become construction advertisements, and you find yourself turning your steps toward the kind of evidence that does survive, the kind that carries names, dedications, and proud claims in durable material. Because if you cannot find the architect directly, you can still trace the propaganda of building, and through that, catch glimpses of the hands beneath the crown. You keep drifting through the city like a quiet question looking for an answer, and the answer you get is not a person stepping forward, but a ruler's voice booming from clay and stone. It is the ancient equivalent of a billboard that reads, "Look what I built." Except it is carved so lovingly you can tell the ego came with a budget. You feel the story tightening around a name that survives more clearly than most, Gudea of Lagash. Not because he is the only builder king, but because the evidence around him is so vivid you can practically hear him clearing his throat to begin a speech about how he personally improved society with bricks. You step into an imagined courtyard, lit by daylight in your mind, though night still clings to your present drift, and there he is in statue form. Gudea, hands clasped in that formal devotional pose, eyes wide, robe patterned, posture calm but purposeful. Some statues show him holding a tablet on his lap, with a plan incised on it, and that detail makes your spine tingle, because it is the closest thing you get to an ancient blueprint being displayed like a trophy. It is art and propaganda and technical pride, all fused into one serene stone face. Mainstream historical fact, steady and true. Gudea, ruler of Lagash in the late 3rd millennium BCE, is famous for commissioning extensive building projects, especially temples, and for leaving numerous inscriptions and statues that describe these works and present him as a pious builder chosen by the gods. His texts talk about gathering materials from distant regions, organizing labor, dedicating structures, and restoring sacred order through construction. This is building as legitimacy turned up to maximum volume. You circle the statue and see the tablet on his lap more clearly. Lines and shapes mark it. Scholars interpret it as a plan, possibly of a temple or its layout, though the exact technical meaning is debated. But the symbolic meaning is loud. The ruler is connected to design. He's not merely commanding. He is pictured as knowing, as overseeing, as holding the city's form in his hands. Historians still argue whether the imagery of rulers holding building plans reflects direct technical involvement or whether it is primarily symbolic, portraying the ruler as the organizer and guarantor of cosmic and civic order. In other words, did Gudea truly understand the engineering, or is he wearing the role of architect as a costume of authority? Standing here, you can feel both possibilities again. A ruler does not need to personally calculate loads to be deeply involved in planning and oversight. But the statue also clearly wants you to believe he's the mind behind the work, even if a team of experts did the measuring. You wander through the inscriptions in your imagination. They talk about materials, cedar wood from far away, stone, metals, precious goods. This matters because it reveals how construction is also a trade network story. A temple is not just mud and straw. It is imported prestige. It is proof that you have the reach to pull rare materials into your city, and that reach means power. If you can bring cedar, you can bring alliances. If you can bring stone, you can bring influence. You picture boats arriving at a canal landing, loaded with timber, stone blocks, baskets of bitumen. Workers strain, foremen shout, scribes write. The whole city's infrastructure bends to support the project. The temple becomes a magnet for resources, and the ruler becomes the public face of that magnetism. The silent architect's hands are still there, but now they are framed by the ruler's narrative. Quirky tidbit time. Deliciously strange, but rooted in the tone of these texts. In Gudea's inscriptions, there are dreamlike elements. The ruler receives divine instructions, sometimes through dreams, visions, or omens, about how and what to build. That is part religion, part politics, part storytelling. The god says build, the ruler obeys, and the building proves the ruler's devotion. It is a loop of legitimacy sealed with mortar, and it is also a very clever way to shut down criticism. Because if someone says, "This temple project is expensive," the ruler can imply, "Are you arguing with the god?" In ancient bureaucratic terms, that is a brutal mic drop. Joke one slides in as you imagine the dream meeting. The god appears and says, "Build me a bigger house." And Gudea nods like a tired contractor hearing a client say, "Can we add just one more level?" Sure. One more level. Definitely not the start of a 6-month scope creep. You move beyond the statue to the foundation story, because foundations are where rulers love to place their signatures, literally and symbolically. Foundation deposits, inscribed cones or bricks, objects buried under corners. They are like sacred receipts hidden inside the building, saying, "This was built by me, under divine instruction, on this date, with this dedication." The building becomes a message to future generations, even if the walls crumble. The deposit survives. The claim survives. Here the silent architect becomes visible only as an absence. Because if the ruler is burying objects to claim credit, Then someone else is doing the practical foundation work. Someone is measuring corners. Someone is leveling. Someone is deciding how deep to dig in certain soils. Someone is dealing with water seepage. Someone is telling workers where to place the first bricks. That person might never get a statue, but without him, the ruler's claim would sit on a crooked base. You imagine the master builder or overseer standing near the foundation trench, holding a rope, perhaps a measuring rod, calling out adjustments. He is focused, quiet, practical. He knows that a temple that looks divine today can slump tomorrow if the soil is not prepared. He knows that the ruler's legacy depends on physics. That is a strange kind of pressure, to hold up a king's immortality with mud and technique. Historians still argue about how building labor is organized in these projects. Are workers conscripted, paid in rations, assigned through temple systems? How much is voluntary communal duty versus coerced labor? The answer likely shifts by context and time. But the debate matters because it affects how you read Gudæa's pious builder image. If the temple is built on joyful communal devotion, it feels different than if it is built on pressure and obligation. The inscriptions rarely dwell on the aches in workers' shoulders. Joke 2 arrives when you imagine an inscription's cheerful tone clashing with reality. The people rejoiced as they carried bricks. It says, while the people privately mutter, yes, rejoiced. Totally. My back is singing hymns right now. You keep walking and notice something else about these monuments. They create a paper trail of sacred construction. They record what is built, what is restored, what materials come from where. They are valuable to you as a listener because they are one of the few places where the building story is explicit. But they are also propaganda. They are curated. They are designed to show the ruler as the bridge between gods and city. That is why Gudæa's famous plan tablet matters so much. It is a symbol that tries to merge technical intelligence with divine devotion. It says, the ruler is not only pious, he is competent. He knows measurements. He holds the plan. He is the architect, and in that symbolic gesture, you can almost see the silent architect's silhouette behind him, because the ruler's claim only works if the city believes that building is a sign of righteous leadership. That belief itself is part of the system. The silent architect designs structures that amplify that belief. Towering platforms, controlled approaches, smooth plaster, symmetrical buttresses. The building looks stable, and stability feels like divine approval. Quirky tidbit, a little fringe but still plausible in the realm of cultural imagination. Some people like to read these statues and inscriptions as hints of an ancient technical tradition far more advanced than we assume. As if Gudæa's plan tablet is proof of secret engineering manuals. The reality is that ancient builders can be incredibly skilled without needing modern blueprints. And a symbolic plan image does not necessarily mean detailed drawn plans exist in our sense. But the fascination shows you how hungry we are to find the architect as a single genius. We want the story to have a hero with a plan. The ancient city is more comfortable as a myth when you can pin it to one name. Joke 3. You imagine a modern influencer reviewing the Gudæa statue. Guys, he's holding a tablet, so you know he's serious about design. 10 out of 10 would commission a ziggurat. You step back from the statue and look at the city again. The real one around you, torches flickering, people moving, water murmuring somewhere nearby. And you realize something. These monuments are not the architect. They are the mask worn by power. They show you how building becomes a language of authority. They show you how rulers appropriate the silent architect's work to tell a story about themselves. But they also give you clues about the technical world beneath. The mention of distant materials implies networks. The need for careful foundations implies surveying. The act of dedicating and recording implies administrative complexity. The city is a machine, and the ruler wants you to believe he is the operator. As you continue walking, you feel your attention shifting from the propaganda of building to the hidden mathematics of building. Because behind every claim is a calculation. Behind every platform is a measure. Behind every wall is an understanding of geometry, weight, and number. The silent architect's real language might not be names at all. It might be math. You leave Gudæa's polished propaganda behind. But the idea of that tablet on his lap stays in your mind like a faint imprint in clay. A plan, a layout, a promise that somebody somewhere knows the numbers behind the bricks. And as you wander deeper into the city's quieter arteries, you start noticing how often people count without making a fuss about it. Fingers tapping, pebbles shifted, knots in a chord, marks on a shard, a murmur that sounds like someone reciting quantities the way you recite a shopping list so you do not forget the one thing you will absolutely forget. You find a small open space near a workshop where a man sits with a board. Maybe wood, maybe plastered clay, and on it are lines scratched lightly, not decorative, but purposeful. A couple of younger workers hover nearby. One holds a length of rope, another holds a straight stick, smoothed by use. The older man gestures, and they stretch the rope taut, then adjust it, then mark something. You realize you are watching geometry happen without anyone calling it geometry. It is just work, the kind of work that keeps roofs from sagging and walls from leaning like tired drunks. Mainstream historical fact, warm and steady. Mesopotamian societies use a base 60-number system, often called sexagesimal, and develop practical mathematics for measurement, land surveying, and construction. This is the long ancestor of why you still have 60 minutes in an hour and 360 degrees in a circle. You're standing in the early workshop of that logic, where numbers are not abstract puzzles, but tools for keeping the real world upright. The rope is the first revelation. It is simple, cheap, portable, and it can do astonishing things. With rope, you measure length. With rope and a few stakes, you lay out straight lines. With rope folded or knotted, you create repeating units. You can make right angles by practical methods. And even if no one here talks about theory, they can still produce consistent corners. The silent architect, in this moment, is not a shadowy genius. He is a person who understands how to make space behave. You watch them mark out a rectangle. The younger worker tries to eyeball it, and the older man corrects him with a small, sharp gesture. Not angry, just precise. That correction is the sound of knowledge being transferred from body to body. The younger worker adjusts, nods, tries again. The rectangle tightens into shape. Joke 1 arrives quietly while you watch. Because your modern brain cannot resist, you think, wow, this is ancient CAD, except the software is rope. The mouse is a stick, and the undo button is just everyone sighing and starting over. They measure again. Then again, checking diagonals, checking lengths, making sure the shape is true. You feel a calm satisfaction because you know what happens if they do not. A wall begins crooked. It stays crooked. A platform begins uneven. It slumps. A roof begins badly aligned. It creaks and cracks and eventually gives up. And then the owner blames the gods, and the builder blames the mud, and everyone blames everyone. Measurement is peacekeeping. As you walk onward, you notice how the city's most important structures seem to share proportions that feel intentional. a platform's width relative to its height, stairways that are shallow enough for processions, buttresses spaced at regular intervals. Even if each site and era differs, the underlying idea is consistent. There is a practical grammar of building here, a set of ratios and habits that make mud brick architecture stable. Historians still argue whether the mathematical techniques we can see in later Mesopotamian tablets reflect long-established building practices already present in early Sumer, or whether formal mathematical recording and teaching develops later while earlier builders rely more on experiential rules of thumb. Watching the rope and the stakes, you suspect the truth is layered. Practical math exists first as practice. Later it becomes written, formalized, teachable in a scribal school. The silent architect lives in both worlds, the hand that measures and the tablet that preserves the method. You pass a scribal corner and see a student practicing numbers, repeating marks in rows, the clay tablet covered in careful impressions. He looks tired in that familiar way that says, "I did not choose the math life. The math life chose me." The teacher points. The student corrects. It feels like school, which is both comforting and tragic. You think about the base 60 system again. Why 60? It is divisible by many numbers, which makes fractions easier in daily accounting. If you are splitting grain rations, measuring land, dividing labor, 60 plays? Nice. The silent architect loves a number system that makes division less painful, because division is everywhere. Dividing a field into plots, dividing bricks among crews, dividing time for water allocation. Joke 2 slides in as you imagine an ancient builder looking at a complicated fraction and saying the exact same thing you have said. Who invented this? Then realizing the answer is basically, we did, and now we have to live with it. History is a self-owned prank. You find yourself near a construction site where a small vault or arched opening is being attempted, or at least a roof spanning a narrow space with carefully placed bricks and reeds. Someone is testing load distribution the hard way. A builder taps a beam, listens, adjusts. This is physics in the form of intuition, but behind the intuition is pattern recognition that comes from repeated failures and improvements. The silent architect's math might not always be written as equations. It might be written as this span works and that span collapses. Now, the quirky tidbit. The one that makes the scene feel a little uncanny in a sleepy way. Later, Mesopotamian mathematical tablets include problem sets that look eerily like school exercises, sometimes involving measuring fields, calculating volumes, and working with complicated fractions and geometric shapes. People sometimes imagine these as pure intellectual puzzles, but they may reflect real administrative and building needs. It is oddly comforting, in a cosmic way, to realize that 4,000 years ago, someone is also staring at a tablet thinking, if the length is this and the width is that, why is my life like this? You keep walking and your eye catches small markers along a wall, subtle lines that could be measurement guides, or the remains of plaster scoring, or simple wear. You cannot always tell. That uncertainty is part of the feeling. The city hides its calculations inside its surfaces. A finished wall does not brag about the numbers that made it stand. You pause beside a stack of bricks and consider the volume of a platform again. It is not just a lot of bricks. It is a number you can estimate if you know the dimensions. Height times width times length, adjusted for the structure's shape. Those calculations determine how much clay must be dug, how much straw must be gathered, how many days of labor are needed, how many rations must be allocated. Math becomes logistics. Logistics becomes political power. Because if you can predict resources, You can command projects without starving your workforce, and that keeps your city stable enough to keep believing in you. The silent architect's true trick might be foresight, not prophecy. Planning. Being able to say, if we build this wall, we need this many bricks, this much labor, this many days, and this much food. That is a quiet kind of magic. It makes a dream into a schedule. You notice how often people check alignments with simple tools. A plumb line to find vertical, a level by eye, by water, by experience, a straight edge, a measuring rod. These are humble objects, but they are civilization's jewelry. They sparkle not because they are pretty, but because they make complex cooperation possible. Joke 3 arrives as you watch someone fuss over a corner, adjusting it by a finger's width, because you suddenly understand the universal builder mindset. The corner has to be right, even if nobody else notices, because the builder will notice forever. You imagine an ancient master builder waking up in the middle of the night whispering, "That corner," like it is a ghost. As the evening deepens, the city's geometry becomes less visible, but you feel it more. You feel it in how streets meet, how walls hold, how platforms rise, how stairs guide bodies. The numbers are everywhere, hidden inside the choices, pressed into clay without being shouted. And you realize the silent architect's language is not a name. It is proportion. It is measurement. It is the quiet certainty that this length fits that space, that this wall thickness can bear that weight, that this canal slope will carry water without tearing the bank apart. In a world where mud is the main material, math is the skeleton. You walk on, letting the calm of measured lines settle your mind, and you sense the next step approaching. Because once you understand that math holds up roofs and platforms, you start noticing the places where math turns into fear and prestige. The places where the city stops being only a home and becomes a statement. The walls that ring the city like a clenched fist. You keep walking, and the city seems to tighten its shoulders. The lanes you have been drifting through begin to angle toward a boundary, and you can tell it is a boundary because the air changes. There is more open sky, fewer courtyards, more space where people can see you from farther away, which is always a fun feeling when you're trying to be an invisible time traveler with no official rations. The ground rises slightly again, not because of history layers this time, but because someone has deliberately built up earth and brick into something that looks like a line drawn across the world. A wall. Not a cute garden wall. Not a "please do not step on my plants" wall. A city wall. Thick, long, and serious, with a presence that makes your body slow down the way you slow down when you see a security checkpoint, even if you have done nothing wrong, which is exactly what a wall is meant to do. You stare up at mud brick mass that has been patched and repatched, buttressed and reinforced, its surface rough with age and repair. It smells faintly of dust and sun and old plaster. Mainstream historical fact. Hammered into place, Mesopotamian city-states often build defensive walls, especially as competition and conflict between cities intensify. These walls can be massive mud brick constructions with towers, gates, and sometimes moats or ditches, serving both practical defense and symbolic display. A wall says, "We are organized enough to build this," which is a warning as much as a brag. You walk along the base. The wall's shadow is cool. You can hear the city behind you. You can hear the outside too, a quieter plain sound, wind moving through reeds, distant birds. The wall divides worlds. Inside is society, storage, temples, rules. Outside is fields, canals, travelers, potential trouble. The line is physical, but it is also psychological. It tells you where you belong. At a gate, you see the architecture of control made obvious. The opening is not wide and inviting. It is narrow enough to manage, framed by thicker walls, sometimes with a bent entry path that forces incoming people to turn, to slow, to be seen. A gate is a choke point. A gate is a filter. It is where guards can ask questions, where fees can be collected, where the city decides who enters and who waits. Joke 1 arrives as you imagine ancient gate security. A guard squints at you and says, "Purpose of visit?" And you, with your modern brain, almost reply, "Just vibing," which would definitely get you detained for suspicious, mystical behavior. You stand near the gate and watch the flow. A farmer enters with a basket of produce. A merchant arrives with jars. A traveler leads a donkey. A guard watches, expression unreadable. A scribe might be nearby, because gates are also accounting points. Goods in and out matter. Taxes matter. The wall is not just defense. It is revenue management with bricks. Historians still argue whether the earliest major city walls are primarily responses to real military threats, or whether they also function as symbols of civic identity and prestige, even when immediate threats are limited. You can feel the symbolic weight. A wall is a statement. We are a city, not a village. We have boundaries. We have an inside that is worth protecting. We have a community that can mobilize labor to build something that does not directly produce food, which means we have surplus and organization. You run your hand lightly over the wall's surface. The mud brick is rough, grainy, with bits of straw visible. Your fingers pick up dust. This is the same material as houses, but scaled into a monument. It is everyday clay made extraordinary through sheer volume. And that volume is the silent architect's playground, because a wall is pure engineering, stability, drainage, buttressing, foundation strength, repair cycles. It is also pure logistics. How many bricks? How many laborers? How many days? How many rations? How much clay? You look up and imagine towers spaced along the wall, rising slightly higher, giving defenders a vantage point. Even if you're not watching an actual battle, you can sense how the architecture thinks about conflict. The wall is a prepared answer to a question that might not be asked today, but could be asked tomorrow, with spears, quirky tidbit time, with a faint fringe shimmer. Later, Mesopotamian tradition loves to tell stories about city walls as almost mythic objects, sometimes linked to legendary kings and heroic building feats. Think of tales where walls define greatness. When a wall becomes part of myth, it stops being just defense and becomes identity. Even if early Sumer is not yet wrapped in later epic narratives the same way, the seed is here. A wall invites story. It invites bragging. It invites an idea of permanence in a world of mud. Joke 2 slides in as you picture the wall getting reviewed by neighboring cities. Great Wall. 5 stars. Very intimidating. Would not invade again. While the builders are like, "Thank you. We cried in the clay pits for this." You walk farther along and notice repair patches. Newer bricks inserted among older ones, different plaster textures. The wall is never finished, like the temple. It is always becoming. The city spends a portion of its life maintaining this ring of security. That maintenance is labor-heavy, which means the wall is also a tool for organizing people. You can command citizens to work on the wall as duty. You can bond them through shared effort. You can also exhaust them through endless repair, which has its own political consequences. The silent architect becomes sharper here. In a wall, you can see choices. How thick is the base? How does it handle water runoff? Are there drainage channels at the foot? Does the wall sit on a packed earth berm? Are there ditches beyond? Each choice reflects knowledge of soil, moisture, and force. And each choice reflects social priorities. How much labor can you demand? How much fear drives people to comply? How much prestige you want to project? You glance outward, beyond the wall, and see fields and canals. You remember how fragile those systems are. A wall protects the city, but it does not protect crops outside if an enemy raids fields or cuts canals. That reality makes the wall feel both powerful and limited. It is a defensive statement, but the city's true vulnerability lies in the water network. You cannot wall a river. Historians still argue about the balance of warfare versus diplomacy in city-state relationships, and how that balance shapes construction priorities. Some eras and regions might see frequent raiding. Others might rely more on alliances and trade. But walls remain, partly because fear is persuasive. Fear makes people accept authority. Fear makes people work. Fear makes them tolerate ration systems and record-keeping and temple control because the alternative is chaos. You approach a spot where the wall meets a canal or ditch. Here, the engineering becomes even more obvious. The water line must be managed so it does not undermine the foundation. The bank must be reinforced. Maybe there is a sluice. Maybe there is a bridge. The wall is not a simple line. It is a set of interactions with the landscape. You sit for a moment in the shadow and listen. The city behind you is alive. The outside beyond the wall is alive too, but quieter, less structured. You think about what it means to live inside a boundary. Safety, control, belonging, also surveillance, also obligation. A wall protects, but it also defines who you are under. It turns a group of people into citizens or subjects of this place. Joke 3. Soft and sleepy. You imagine someone inside the city complaining, "Why do we keep repairing the wall?" And someone else replying, "Because the wall is the only thing standing between us and the outside." And then a third person mutters, "Also because the king loves a good wall photo op." And the first person says, "What is a photo?" And everyone just goes back to hauling bricks. As the night deepens, torches on the gate flicker brighter. Guards shift positions. A late traveler is questioned. The wall holds the city's line in the darkness. It is a ring of intention. It is architecture that speaks in the language of threat, and you feel the narrative turning inward again, away from the big prestige objects and back into ordinary life. Because walls may define the city's boundary, but the silent architect's influence also lives in the small, intimate decisions inside that boundary. The design of houses, the arrangement of courtyard, the way families shape space to fit heat, privacy, and daily routine. The city's strength is not only in what it keeps out, it is in how it holds its people together inside. You leave the wall's shadow and step back into the city's belly, where everything feels softer, warmer, and more human. The boundary fades behind you, and in its place you get the quiet bustle of domestic life. Low voices, a baby's brief complaint, the scratch of a broom made of reeds, the smell of stew thickening on a clay hearth. It is easy to get hypnotized by monuments and gates. But the truth is, most of the city happens here, in the spaces that do not get inscriptions. If the silent architect has a secret masterpiece, it might not be the ziggurat at all. It might be the house. Because the house is where people live through heat, dust, gossip, illness, celebration, and the constant chore list that never dies. You drift along a lane and pause at a doorway. The opening is small and dark, and it does not invite you the way modern front doors do. It feels guarded. The street is public, but the house is not. You step in, and the corridor turns, blocking the view from outside. That little turn is an architectural sigh of relief. You are inside without being seen from the street. Privacy achieved through geometry. Mainstream historical fact. Grounded and ordinary. Many Mesopotamian urban houses are built around an interior courtyard, often with rooms opening onto it and with relatively blank outer walls facing the street. This layout supports ventilation, light, shade, and privacy. It also helps manage heat, because the courtyard can act like a thermal buffer. The city's domestic architecture is quietly sophisticated, engineered for climate and social norms. In the courtyard, the air feels different, cooler. Still, the sky is a neat rectangle overhead. A small hearth glows. A pot simmers. Someone kneads dough. A child sits near a wall, drawing patterns in dust with a stick, fully committed to the ancient pastime of making a mess and calling it creativity. A woman spreads a mat. A man repairs a tool. These are not scenes of grand politics, but they are the city's true continuity. You notice the walls, thick enough to insulate, plastered to reduce dust, sometimes reinforced where needed. Floors are hard-packed, maybe covered with mats. Storage jars sit in corners. A niche in the wall holds small objects. The space is organized around routine. The silent architect here is not imposing power. He is shaping comfort. A courtyard is not only practical, it is emotional. It is the center of family life, where voices gather, where meals happen, where heat is endured together. Historians still argue whether variations in house layouts reflect strong social class differences, regional building traditions, or changing household structures over time. You can sense class in the details. Some houses are larger, with multiple courtyards, more storage, better plaster, perhaps even decorative features. Others are tight, rooms pressed close, fewer resources. Yet the basic principle repeats: inward-facing, climate-smart, privacy-minded. It is a shared language with dialects. You step out and move to another house. Smaller. The corridor is narrower. The courtyard is cramped. But the same logic holds. The wall blocks street view. The courtyard opens to sky. It is a pattern that spreads because it works, like a meme before memes. Except nobody is doing a dance about it. Joke one slips in as you realize the courtyard house is basically the original open concept. Except instead of an Instagram-worthy kitchen island, you get a mud brick hearth and a goat that occasionally wanders through like it pays rent. You drift deeper into the residential lanes. They twist and tighten, sometimes opening into tiny shared spaces where neighbors gather. A woman calls out to someone across a wall, her voice confident, like she owns the right to ask questions. Another voice answers. They laugh. Gossip moves faster than water here. The narrow lanes keep sound close. You cannot hide. You can only pretend you are not listening. You notice how houses press against each other, sharing walls, saving materials, creating dense blocks. That density is efficient. It keeps heat down in summer by shading alleys. It reduces exposed wall surface. It also creates a social intimacy that is both supportive and exhausting. The city's design forces community. You cannot escape your neighbors, which is great if they are kind, and less great if they are the kind of people who judge your bread texture loudly. Joke 2. You imagine an ancient complaint tablet, like a customer review, that reads, 2 stars, nice courtyard. Neighbor's goat screams at 3 a.m. You pass a small drainage channel running along the lane. It is shallow, simple, but it keeps wastewater from pooling. You can tell people sweep toward it. The city's domestic architecture includes tiny infrastructural gestures, like guiding liquids away from walls, raising thresholds to keep water out, plastering floors to make cleaning easier. None of this is monumental. All of it matters. Inside another house, you see a staircase leading up to the roof. Roof access is important. Flat roofs can be used for drying goods, sleeping in hot weather, working in the evening breeze. Roofs are part of living space. That means the silent architect thinks vertically even in ordinary homes, creating a layered domestic world. Street, courtyard, roof, all used differently depending on time of day and season. Quirky tidbit time, a small domestic mystery that lingers. Archaeologists sometimes find little figurines, amulets, or strange deposits in houses, tucked into corners or under thresholds, suggesting household rituals meant to protect the family, ward off misfortune, or ensure fertility and health. It is the home version of foundation deposits. The house is not only shelter, it is a protective bubble against unseen forces. The architecture includes spiritual defense. If you cannot control disease or bad luck, you at least control where you place a charm. You imagine a mother tucking an amulet into a wall niche, whispering a request to a household deity or a protective spirit. The building holds that whisper. It becomes part of the wall's purpose. The silent architect, in this sense, designs space that can hold ritual. A corner becomes a sacred corner. A threshold becomes a boundary against more than just intruders. The home is a tiny universe. Historians still argue about the exact nature of a household religion in early Mesopotamia and how it intersects with temple worship. Some practices are visible, some are inferred, some are debated. But you can feel the reality. People want control. They want reassurance. They want to believe their walls mean something. When the outside world is uncertain, the home becomes a sacred technology. You step back into the lane and smell something sweet. Maybe dates. Maybe a simmering syrup. A family is preparing food. Someone fans a small fire. Smoke curls into the night. You hear laughter. A child squeals. The city's domestic rhythm is soothing, and it's easy to forget the walls, the canals, the king's claims. This is the city's heartbeat, steady and ordinary. Joke 3 arrives softly as you watch someone sweep the courtyard and think, yes, even in the first cities, someone is still doing chores while everyone else talks about gods and politics. Civilization begins when somebody says, "We cannot have nice things if you keep tracking mud inside." You wander through a small alley and notice a doorway marked by a simple symbol. Maybe a family sign, maybe a protective mark, maybe just decoration, but it makes you think again about identity. In a city where major credit goes to kings, households claim identity in quiet ways, marks, routines, reputations. A family's house becomes its legacy. The walls are its memory. When they rebuild on the same footprint, maintaining continuity, keeping ancestors close in a layered mound of floors and plaster. As the night deepens, more people move to rooftops. You glance up and see silhouettes against the sky. Someone calls out to a neighbor. Someone shakes out a mat. Someone sits and watches the stars. The city becomes a layered chorus of quiet domestic life, stacked in mud-brick tiers. And you realize that the silent architect's most enduring influence might be the way he shapes daily experience. How heat feels, how privacy feels, how community feels, how sound travels, how children play, how adults rest. A ziggurat might dominate the skyline, but a courtyard shapes every day. You feel the narrative pulling you toward the edge of what is known and the edge of what is imagined. Because once you understand the practical genius of Sumerian life, the temptation grows to push beyond it, toward theories about cosmic alignments, star-guided streets, secret maps, and all the fringe whispers that attach themselves to ancient cities like ivy on old walls. The city is about to invite you into its strangest mirror, the stories we tell when we cannot bear the silence of missing answers. You keep drifting under that roofline of silhouettes and stars, and you feel the city's ordinary calm begin to blur at the edges, like your mind is trying to turn practical life into myth because myth is soothing. The streets are darker now. The torches are fewer. The canal water reflects the sky in broken pieces, and you can see stars trembling on the surface as if the heavens are trying to read themselves in liquid. It is in nights like this that people start telling stories that feel bigger than mud brick, bigger than barley, bigger than the daily sweep of a courtyard. You walk toward a more open space. Somewhere you can see the skyline clearly. The temple platform rises as a darker mass against the stars. The city wall is a low line at the edge of sight. Rooftops stack like steps. You find yourself doing what humans always do when they see a pattern. You start looking for intentional alignment. Does that stairway point somewhere? Does that temple face a specific sunrise? Is that street angled for a reason beyond it fit between two houses? Mainstream historical fact. Soft but steady. Mesopotamian societies developed sophisticated astronomy and calendrical observation over time, tracking celestial cycles for months, seasons, and ritual schedules, and later producing detailed astronomical texts. Even in earlier periods, people watched the sky closely because timing matters for agriculture, festivals, and administration. If you do not know when to plant or when to expect seasonal changes, you suffer. The sky becomes a clock, and the city learns to read it. You stand in the open and tilt your head back. The stars feel sharp, more numerous than you are used to, because there is no electric glare. The Milky Way looks like spilled flour across black cloth. You can see why the sky becomes a storybook. You can see why a builder might feel tempted to echo the heavens in brick. And this is where the fringe whispers arrive, not as loud conspiracy, but as gentle curiosity. You hear them in the way people glance up after a ritual, in the way a priest's words include the sun and moon, in the way a child points at a bright planet and asks what it is. The idea forms in your mind. Maybe the silent architect is not only measuring ground, maybe he is measuring the sky. Historians still argue whether apparent alignments in ancient Near Eastern sacred architecture reflect deliberate astronomical planning, practical orientation to landscape and prevailing winds, or later interpretations that project cosmic intention onto structures primarily built for social and religious needs. That debate matters because it is easy to see patterns after the fact. When you want meaning, you will find meaning. A wall might face east because east is holy, or because east offers morning light, or because the ground is firmer there. Maybe all three. You walk along a street that seems to aim toward the temple district, and you imagine a processional route timed to sunrise. You picture a festival morning where people move along that line, chanting, carrying offerings, watching the first light hit plastered walls. It would feel like the city is designed for the sky's theater. But then you remember how streets also form around property lines, around drainage, around the accidents of rebuilding. A city is part plan, part improvisation. The silent architect might design some anchors, and the rest grows around them like vines. Joke 1 slides in as you realize your brain is doing what it always does at 2 a.m. Turning a slightly crooked street into a grand cosmic mystery. You think, maybe it points to Venus, Then you immediately hear your own inner voice adding, or maybe it points to a convenient bakery. You wander closer to the temple platform again and look at how it sits, elevated, dominant, oriented in a way that feels purposeful. Some later Mesopotamian temples and ritual buildings are indeed aligned with cardinal directions or significant points. And later, astronomical practice becomes deeply entwined with ritual and kingship. But you also feel the practical side. Orientation can help with airflow, sun exposure, there's drainage. The silent architect can be both pragmatic and symbolic without needing secret alien instructions. Humans are perfectly capable of mixing poetry and engineering in the same brick. Still, the fringe imagination is persistent, and you can sense how it grows. A city rises from mud. It builds a stepped mountain. It writes in wedges. It measures time by sky. It feels advanced. And when something feels advanced, people love to assume there must be a hidden source, a lost master plan, a secret class of engineers, a cosmic map. Here comes the quirky tidbit, delivered like a low whisper. There are later Mesopotamian traditions of omen literature where celestial events are read as messages, and scholars and priests interpret the sky as a communication system. You can imagine how that interpretive habit bleeds into architecture in people's minds. If the sky speaks, then maybe buildings can be arranged to listen, even if the evidence for precise star-guided street grids is mixed. The cultural logic that the heavens matter is very real. The sky is not decoration. It is authority. You watch a priestly figure on a rooftop, or at least someone who moves with that careful ritual posture, observing the horizon. Maybe he is timing something. Maybe he is just enjoying the cool air. But your mind turns it into a scene, a watcher counting nights, tracking a planet's return, aligning a festival. The calendar is a power tool. Whoever controls time controls labor, controls taxes, controls when people gather, controls when the city breathes together. The silent architect of the city might have a cousin, the silent architect of time. You drift toward a small scribal corner where a student has left a practice tablet out to dry. The wedge marks catch the torchlight. You cannot read them, but you can feel the discipline behind them. Numbers, lists, dates, the record of time made physical. The city is building a second architecture out of observation and notation, an invisible scaffold that holds society's rhythm. Joke 2 arrives when you imagine the sky watcher trying to explain his job to a builder. I look at stars so we know when to plant. And the builder replies, I look at walls so they do not fall. And then both of them stare at the king like, and what do you do? Exactly. While the king smiles and says, I commission. You keep walking, and the city's edges blur into the plain beyond the wall. In the distance, the horizon is a clean line. It makes you think about mapping, surveying, the urge to represent space. People sometimes talk about ancient maps like they are rare magical objects, and in a way they are. Turning land into lines on clay is a powerful trick. There are ancient examples of schematic maps in Mesopotamia, though many are later than the earliest Sumerian period. Still, the impulse is present. Measure fields, define boundaries, record who owns what. A map is not just a picture. It is a legal weapon. That is where the fringe grows teeth. Because if you imagine the city's planners drawing maps and aligning temples to stars, you start imagining an elite technical priesthood controlling everything, a hidden board of directors of civilization, and it is not hard to see why people love that idea. It makes the world feel designed. It makes the chaos feel curated. But you also see the counter-truth in the streets you have walked. The city is patched, repaired, layered. It is not a perfect diagram. It is lived in. It smells like soup and clay and sweat. It has donkey protests and neighbor drama and children drawing in dust. If there is a master plan, it has been negotiated with reality for centuries. Historians still argue whether certain urban layouts in ancient Mesopotamia should be interpreted as intentional planning schemes, religious cosmograms, or emergent patterns shaped by property, topography, and institutional anchors like temples and palaces. That debate stays open because the city does not leave you a single clean answer. It leaves you walls. It leaves you canals. It leaves you hints. Joke 3 slips in as you imagine yourself trying to pitch the star-guided street theory to a tired canal worker. He looks at you, covered in mud, and says, "Friend, the only star I care about is the one I see when I hit my head on this beam." You pause under the night sky and feel the two realities coexisting. One is practical, measurable, repeatable. The other is symbolic, interpretive, hungry for meaning. The silent architect lives at their intersection. He builds for heat and water and weight, but he also builds for sight lines, for ritual movement, for the feeling of rising toward a god. Whether or not a specific stair aligns to a specific star, the architecture is already cosmic in intention, because it is meant to connect earth life to sky order. As you turn back toward the city's heart, you notice how the ziggurat's silhouette cuts into the stars. It is a human-made mountain, a statement that says, we can shape the horizon. That statement alone is enough to attract myths like moths to flame, and you feel the story's tone beginning to darken, not with violence, but with inevitability. Because all this planning, all this brilliance, all this effort to organize water, people, and meaning faces a slow enemy that does not care about your alignments. The land itself changing, salt in the soil, rivers shifting, small mistakes accumulating until they become collapse. The city's cosmic dreams do not stop the quiet chemistry underfoot. You walk as if the city is still solid beneath you, but now you can taste the future in the air, faintly bitter, like the aftertaste of a stew that has simmered a little too long. The night is cooler, yet the ground holds heat and history, and you feel the city's confidence thinning at the edges, not collapsing in a dramatic thunderclap, not bursting into flames like an overexcited movie scene, more like a slow loosening of seams, the kind you only notice when you press your hand against a wall and realize the plaster has cracked again in the same spot it cracked last year. You drift back toward the fields. Because when a city begins to fail, it usually fails first where it eats. Beyond the wall, the irrigated land lies in patchwork strips, darker in some places, pale in others. In torchlight, the soil sometimes glints in an odd way, and your stomach tightens because you recognize that glint. Salt. The kind of salt that sneaks up on a civilization with the patience of a cat waiting for you to look away from your dinner. Mainstream historical fact. Spoken softly but firmly. Long-term irrigation in southern Mesopotamia can lead to soil salinization when salts accumulate in the root zone, especially if drainage is insufficient. Over time, this can reduce crop yields and push farmers to change crops, shift fields, or abandon land. Barley tolerates salt better than wheat, so agricultural patterns can shift as salinity rises. This is not a single disaster day. It is chemistry, repeating, quietly rewriting what the land can give. You kneel and rub a pinch of soil between your fingers. It feels powdery, almost silky. Your mind imagines water evaporating under the sun, leaving salt behind, season after season. You picture a farmer watching a field turn stubborn, Seedlings thinning, harvest shrinking. He does not call it salinization. He calls it bad luck, angry gods, a cursed patch, a neighbor stealing water, anything that gives the problem a face. Slow problems are hard because they do not announce themselves. They just keep taking. You walk along a canal bank and notice how the water line sits. The canal is still here. It still moves, but the flow feels slightly sluggish. The banks slightly more fragile, the silt slightly thicker. Maintenance never ends, and when labor is strained, the canal is one of the first places that shows it. A few missed cleanings, a few delayed repairs, and the water starts behaving like it has forgotten your agreement. Joke 1 creeps in despite the heaviness. You imagine the canal as the most passive, aggressive roommate ever. Oh, you skipped maintenance this week? That's cute. Anyway, I'm going to clog myself and ruin your crops. You keep walking and your mind pulls up the other quiet enemy. Rivers do not stay put. The Tigris and Euphrates wander, then shift channels, cut new paths, abandon old ones. A city that depends on a certain watercourse can suddenly find itself slightly off the main flow. Like a shop that used to be on a busy street before the street moved away. You can still operate, but you're no longer central. Trade routes change. Water access changes. The cost of maintaining canals increases. The city's arteries begin to strain. Historians still argue whether the major transitions and declines in certain southern Mesopotamian urban centers are driven primarily by environmental factors like salinization and river shifts, or whether political conflict, economic change, and institutional stress play the larger role. Standing here, you can feel how they intertwine. Environmental stress makes people anxious. Anxiety makes leaders grab power harder. Power grabs create conflict. Conflict disrupts maintenance. Disrupted maintenance worsens environmental stress. The spiral does not need one villain. It only needs a system with too many fragile dependencies. You head back toward the city and pass a stretch of wall where repairs look rushed. Bricks are slightly mismatched. Plaster is thinner. The wall still stands. But it feels like someone is patching a boat while it's still floating. Inside, you notice more small signs. A storage jar sealed tighter than usual. A merchant arguing harder than usual. A scribe writing with a kind of tense focus that says, "Do not make me redo this tally. I will simply dissolve into dust." Joke 2. You imagine the scribe inventing the first workplace slogan, "Keep calm and wedge on." It is not funny to him. It is survival. You drift toward the temple precinct, because when resources tighten, institutions tighten too. The temple storehouses become more important, and therefore more contested. People queue, people whisper, people watch who receives rations and who does not. The temple's ability to redistribute grain becomes a lifeline, and lifelines create leverage. You feel the atmosphere of bargaining, of obligations turning sharper. A blessing can feel like a transaction. A ritual can feel like a fee. You remember how the city's story gives credit upward. When things go well, gods are praised. Kings are praised. But when things go poorly, blame travels too. Maybe the gods are displeased. Maybe the king is illegitimate. Maybe the priests have failed in their duties. Maybe the river has been offended. Maybe your neighbor's goat is cursed. People need reasons. Reasons create factions. Outside the temple walls, you catch fragments of conversation. Someone complains about water allocations. Someone claims the upstream branch is taking too much. Someone says the canal gate was opened at the wrong time. Someone says a foreman demanded extra labor days. These are the tiny grains of conflict that pile into a dune. You drift again toward the canals and see a group of men clearing silt, shoulders tense. movements less rhythmic than before. They argue about who is responsible. One says the other's district did not send enough workers. Another says their people are already exhausted from wall repair. The city's systems are interconnected, and now every system is asking for more than people feel they can give. Quirky, tidbit, soft and eerie. In later Mesopotamian tradition, and even in the way people think about fate, there is this sense that cities can lose divine favor, as if the protective presence can depart. When a great place declines, the narrative often becomes spiritual, not just practical. People may interpret drought, poor harvests, or flooding as signs that the gods have turned away. Whether or not you accept that as literal, it functions as a cultural explanation for collapse. It turns slow environmental change into a story the human heart can hold. We were abandoned, not just mismanaged. You can feel how that belief would reshape behavior. If people think divine favor is slipping, they might increase offerings, intensify rituals, demand new building projects to win back the gods. More building means more labor and more resources. Exactly when resources are thinning, the city tries to fix a leak by adding weight. Joke 3. You imagine a council meeting where someone suggests, "What if we build an even bigger temple?" And somewhere in the back, a tired builder whispers, "What if we build drainage?" And everyone stares at him like he just suggested eating the sacred statue. You walk through a residential lane and see a household storing water more carefully. Jars are clustered. Lids are sealed. People move with a cautious economy. A courtyard hearth burns lower, as if fuel is precious. You notice repairs made with whatever is available. A patchwork aesthetic that looks less like style and more like necessity. Even the sounds are different. Less laughter, more quiet talk, more listening. The city is still alive, still functioning, but it has begun to spend itself faster than it can replenish. When a system is stable, maintenance is routine. When a system is strained, maintenance becomes crisis response. You can see it in the way people walk quicker near the storehouses, in the way guards watch the gates, in the way scribes hunch over tablets as if writing can keep reality from slipping. You pass near the wall again and look out at the fields. The canal network still glimmers faintly in moonlight. It is beautiful, in a bleak way. Human persistence carved into earth. But you can also see the fragility. A bank can break, a channel can silt, a flow can shift, a field can salt, a harvest can fail. The silent architect builds systems, and systems can fail, and yet you do not feel only doom. You feel adaptation too. People shift crops, they dig new canals, they move settlements, they reorganize. A city can decline, but the knowledge does not vanish entirely. It travels in bodies and habits, in tools and stories, in the quiet intelligence of builders who know how to read soil and water even when politics is messy. You turn back toward the city's center one more time, and the ziggurat silhouette still rises against the night sky. It looks eternal from a distance, but you now understand how much constant work it takes to keep it that way. The silent architect's world is not a finished monument. It is an ongoing negotiation with earth, water, and human appetite. And as you walk, you feel the next and final thread pulling you forward. If collapse is slow, so is legacy. The silent architect may never get his name carved in stone, but his choices echo in what survives, in what gets rebuilt, in what later people imitate, misunderstand, or mythologize. You're almost ready to follow the last footprints, not to solve the mystery completely, but to stand beside it and accept what it means to build a world out of mud and hope. You walk back into the city as if you are following a scent only you can notice, a thin trail made of damp plaster, old smoke, and the faint metallic tang of bitumen that never really leaves the air. The night is thinning toward early morning. Somewhere, a rooster is doing what roosters do, which is announce the dawn like it personally invented the sun. Torches gutter out one by one. Rooftop silhouettes fade, and the ziggurat, that heavy-stepped shadow, holds steady against a sky that is slowly bleaching into pale blue. You keep thinking about the silent architect like he is a person you can corner in an alley and politely demand answers from, as if he will step out holding a measuring rope and say, "Yes, it was me. Sorry for the mystery." But the closer you get to the city's core, the more you understand the trick. The architect is not waiting in one place. He is spread through habits, tools, and systems. He is in the courtyard turn that blocks street eyes. He's in the drainage groove you almost tripped over. He's in the canal slope that keeps water moving instead of stagnating. He is in the brick mold that makes rectangles repeatable. He is in the wedge marks that make memory portable. You pass a spot where a wall has recently been repaired, the patch still a slightly different color. A worker kneels there, smoothing plaster with a practiced hand, pressing it into cracks the way you might press lotion into dry skin. He hums quietly, half asleep, half focused. That hum feels like the true anthem of the city. Not the temple chant, not the king's dedication speech. This low, practical sound of maintenance, mainstream historical fact, laid down like a foundation stone. Much of what we know about Mesopotamian building and administration comes from cuneiform records that track labor, materials, and rations, and from the archaeological remains of structures that were constantly rebuilt. Cities literally rise from layers of repair and reconstruction, forming mounds over time. The architecture you admire is often the result of generations repeating a workable set of solutions, not a single moment of genius frozen in stone. You stop near a scribal corner you saw before. A basket of tablets sits under a cloth. A reed stylus lies nearby like a tiny spear abandoned after a paper battle. You imagine the tablet lists brickmakers, carriers, plasterers, canal crews, roles, quantities, dates. Not the kind of writing that makes you cry with poetry, but the kind that keeps a city from starving. The silent architect's fingerprints might be in those lists, not as a name, but as a pattern. This many bricks for that wall, this many labor days for that canal, this much grain to keep workers alive long enough to finish the job. Historians still argue whether architect is even the right word for early Sumerian contexts, or whether it's better to think in terms of overlapping specialists and institutions, master builders, foremen, surveyors, temple administrators, and scribes, all contributing to the city's shape. That debate matters because you keep wanting one person, one face, one satisfying reveal. But the city keeps handing you a network. You wander toward the temple district's edge again, where the plaster is smoother and the air feels slightly more controlled. Like dust itself has to show an ID. You do not go in. You just stand where you can see the steps and imagine the processions that climb them. You think of Gudea statues, those calm eyes and that plan tablet on his lap, and you feel the gap between story and labor. The ruler claims the building, but the building belongs to everyone's backs, everyone's hands, everyone's daily rations. Joke 1 arrives softly as you picture the silent architect watching a king's inscription being carved and muttering, "Amazing, sir. Truly. Now please step away from the foundation trench before you trip." You turn and follow a lane that leads away from the monumental spaces into something quieter, a place where the city's intelligence is not shouting. A row of homes sits close together, walls sharing heat and structure. You notice the way thresholds are slightly raised to keep water out, the way the corridor bends to protect privacy, the way the courtyard opens to sky like a little pocket of breath. These are design choices that do not need a throne to exist. They spread because they keep you cool, keep you safe, keep you sane. In a world where the sun can feel like a hammer, shade is not luxury, it is survival. A child runs past carrying a reed bundle, nearly colliding with you, then swerves at the last moment with the confidence of someone whose bones have never heard of consequences. He laughs and disappears into a doorway. You smile, and you think about how the silent architect is also building the stage where childhood happens, where someone learns to walk, trip, laugh, and grow up inside walls that hold. You find yourself at the canal again, because the canal keeps calling you like a steady heartbeat. The water is lower than you'd like. The bank looks tired. A few men are already out, pulling reeds, clearing silt, trying to persuade the channel to behave for another season. Their work is quiet. There is no ceremony. And yet, this is the work that decides whether the city eats. Joke 2 slips in when you watch a man yank a stubborn clump of reeds and think, yes, this is the ancient version of yelling at your Wi-Fi router. Different century, same rage. You crouch by the water and watch your reflection wobble. The sky is brightening now. Birds cut across it. The city begins its daily breath. Smoke rising, doors opening, voices starting up again. The silent architect does not get a dawn trumpet. He gets continuity. His reward is that the city wakes up and still functions. Here is the quirky tidbit, the kind that feels like a secret tucked into a wall. Builders in Mesopotamian tradition sometimes place objects in foundations, and some inscriptions include warnings or curses meant to protect buildings from damage or improper alteration. It is an anxious kind of immortality. You cannot guarantee a wall will stand forever, so you try to guard it with words and offerings, like locking your door and also leaving a note that says, "Please do not touch. The gods are watching." Even if the curse is aimed at future rulers or invaders, it also reveals something tender. The builder wants the work to last. The work matters. The work is worth defending. You stand and let the canal's smell fill your lungs, then turn slowly, scanning the city one last time as if the missing name might appear on a corner you overlooked. But all you see are choices made visible. The platform height, the stair angle, the wall thickness, the street bend, the courtyard turn, the drainage groove. Those are the architect's signatures. And then you understand the final footprint is not a single clue. It is the way the city teaches its own logic forward. When later people rebuild, they copy what works. When later cities rise, they borrow techniques. When scribes train new scribes, the marks repeat. When builders train apprentices, the rope stretches the same way. The corner is checked the same way. The brick mold is filled the same way. The silent architect becomes a tradition, a method, a shared memory. Joke 3 arrives. Gentle and a little sad. You imagine the silent architect finally getting introduced at a festival like, and now, a round of applause for the person who made sure the drains slope correctly. And the crowd claps politely for 2 seconds before going back to cheering the king. Because of course they do. You walk toward the city's edge, not because you are escaping, but because you are letting the story settle. The wall stands in the distance, patched and persistent. The ziggurat rises, heavy and sure, even as you know it will one day crumble and be rebuilt in some form or remembered in someone else's myth. The fields beyond the wall will salt, shift, recover, fail, and be tried again. The rivers will wander, The people will adapt or move. The city will change. And still, the quiet intelligence remains, pressed into clay and habit. Measure, align, drain, store, repair. Build because you must. Build because the world is unstable and you want something to hold. Build because you are human and you cannot resist leaving your shape on the earth, even if your name does not survive the dust. The sky is fully pale now, and the city's noise softens into a steady morning murmur that feels almost like breathing. You let your shoulders drop. You let the questions loosen their grip. The silent architect never steps into the light with a name tag. And that is strangely comforting. It means the city is not held up by one fragile legend. It is held up by countless small acts done well, repeated until they become invisible. You picture the builder smoothing plaster at dawn, the canal worker clearing silt, the scribe pressing wedges into clay, the mother turning a corridor so the street cannot stare into her courtyard. You picture the brick mold filling, lifting, drying in sunlight, row after row, like calm little rectangles waiting to become a wall that will keep out heat, wind, and worry. You picture the ziggurat steps catching the first light, not as a boast, but as a reminder that people can organize themselves into something steady, even when rivers shift and soil turns bitter, and you feel your mind slowing with the rhythm of it all. Measure, place, smooth, breathe, rest, rebuild. The city fades into a softer outline, like a dream you can keep without needing to solve it. The last thing you hold is not a king's name or grand claim, but the simple sensation of cool plaster under your fingertips and the quiet certainty that someone, somewhere, cared enough to make a corner true. Now you can let the streets dim, let the torches go out, let the canal's surface settle into darkness again. Let the silent architect remain what he has always been, a presence in the design, a whisper in the brick, a steady hand guiding the city toward another morning. End of script. Sweet dreams.